Good evening, dear friends. I'm Pastor Micheal, and tonight I want to guide you gently into one of the quietest and strangest scenes preserved in the ancient Ethiopian memory of the beginning. So, settle your body, let your breathing slow, and if the day has followed you into the dark, let it stand a little farther away, because tonight we are not beginning with the serpent. We are not beginning with shame. We are not beginning with exile. We are beginning before all of that. Before fear became familiar. Before hiding became instinct. Before sorrow learned how to raise its voice. And here is the detail that opens the door. According to the old remembering in Jubilees, there was a time when the beasts, the cattle, the birds, and every moving thing spoke together with one lip and one tongue. Not noise, not confusion, not the sharpness we know so well. A living world, somehow still whole enough to speak without tearing itself apart. If that detail feels mysterious, let it remain mysterious for a while. Do not force it into a definition. Only feel what it suggests. A world not yet broken into competing voices. A creation not yet trained to wound. A field of life where sound had not yet become strain. And standing inside that quieter order are Adam and Eve, before the world grew loud. And that is where we will rest tonight. Not at the end of innocence, but just before it breaks. Not in the noise after the wound, but in the calm before it. A strange place to begin, perhaps. And yet for a tired mind, it may be the kindest place of all. Because most sleeplessness is noisy. Not always outside, but inside. Thought speaking over thought. Memory interrupting prayer. Tomorrow pressing against the ribs. Regret clearing its throat. The body longing for rest, while the mind refuses to release its grip. So tonight I want to bring you to a beginning where the grip has not yet tightened. A beginning where human life has not yet learned to brace itself. A beginning where Adam and Eve are not yet symbols of disaster, but living beings under the breath of God, not performing, not defending, not hiding, simply there, simply known, simply alive. Imagine then the cool highlands of Ethiopia at dusk, stone darkening slowly after the last light, beeswax burning in still air. A breath of cedar smoke passing quietly through the evening. The carved silence of Lalibela holding prayer without needing to announce it. From that hush, let the imagination turn eastward, farther than memory, farther than history, toward Eden. And Eden, tonight, is not first a place of danger. It is a place held at the edge of wonder. A place not yet associated with blame. A place where holiness does not feel like pressure. The old texts remember it with patience. A garden prepared, a threshold marked, a life inside it still ordered by trust. We will come to the gate soon enough. But before the gate, before the entrance, before the keeping of the garden, there is this first great quiet. The quiet in which the beginning can still be heard. Sometimes the soul needs suspense. But not the kind that agitates, not panic, not spectacle, a gentler suspense. The kind that asks, what was the world like just before it changed? What did Adam sound like before grief entered language? What did Eve feel like before fear touched the human body? What did the garden hold in those first unguarded days? What did creation sound like when its voices still answered one another in peace? That is the question at the heart of tonight's journey. Not what was lost in the loudest sense, but what existed before loss became loud. And once that question is asked, the whole night becomes different. Because now sleep is not only escape from fatigue, it becomes a slow return to an older quiet, a quieter world, a quieter body, a quieter soul. Perhaps you need that tonight. Perhaps you have spent too many hours too many months, perhaps too many years, feeling as though only urgency counts. Only crisis gets attention. Only noise feels real. But the beginning tells another truth. Some of the holiest things arrive quietly. The shaping of a human being, the gift of a companion, the opening of a garden, the breath of God. These do not begin in shouting. They begin in nearness. And if you have come into the night carrying the modern fear that rest will make you less important, less visible, less useful, then stay close to this beginning. Adam and Eve are loved before they have achieved anything. They are known before they have performed anything. They are held before they have proven anything. That is already a kind of healing. To remember that life begins as gift, not as pressure. That existence begins with receiving, not with proving. That rest does not cancel worth. So lie down more deeply into the dark. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Let your breathing become less interested in the day behind you. Tonight, Pastor Micheal is not leading you into a storm. He is leading you into the hush before the storm, into the sacred pause before sorrow speaks too loudly, into the old Ethiopian memory of Adam and Eve before the world grew loud. And in the next part, we will move closer to the first man himself, closer to earth, closer to breath, closer to the moment when life begins not with striving, but with God leaning near. Now the story comes closer, not louder, only closer. We leave the wide threshold of the beginning and draw near to Adam himself, to the first human life before the strain of history settled into the body. And what we find there is not hurry. It is tenderness. The old traditions surrounding this beginning speak in images of earth and breath, of stone and dew, of wind and formed life. They imagine the human not as an accident dropped into the world, but as something carefully fitted to it. The body belongs to creation. It is not a prison lowered into the earth. It is not a machine built for endless output. It is a creaturely gift, a formed life, a life meant to breathe under God. Imagine the first stillness before Adam opens his eyes. Earth prepared, air clear, light resting over the ground. No audience, no urgency, only the deep patience of a beginning that does not need spectacle in order to be holy. Then the shaping, then the nearness, then the breath, not snatched, not forced, given. The first inhale entering a body that has not yet learned fear. The first rise of the chest, carrying not panic, but relation. Adam lives because God has drawn near enough to share life. That matters more than we often notice. Because we live in a world that keeps teaching us to make ourselves, define yourself, improve yourself, promote yourself, protect yourself. But the first human does not begin by building himself. He begins by receiving. His first truth is not effort. His first truth is gift. He is alive because he has been breathed into. He is held together by mercy before he ever lifts a hand to work. And perhaps your own tired body needs to hear that tonight. Perhaps you have been treating yourself as a machine that has disappointed its owner. Perhaps you have been angry at your exhaustion, ashamed of your limits, impatient with your need for rest. But Adam begins with breath, not with performance. The body begins as blessing. The body begins as something honored by the nearness of God. That does not erase pain, but it softens the harshness with which we often speak to ourselves. See Adam now as he wakes into the first awareness. He opens his eyes not into a battlefield, but into goodness. Ground beneath him, air around him, light where it belongs. The presence of God not as menace, but as source. He does not awaken already alienated from the world. He awakens inside, belonging. Creation is not resisting him. It has been prepared to receive him. There is a place for his foot to stand. There is a horizon to look toward. There is a life already arranged around him by care. And there is peace in that first awareness. No comparison yet. No shame yet. No memory of failure yet. No crowd of voices telling him what he must become before he is worthy of love. Adam is simply alive before God. That is all. And in that simple condition there is a depth many restless people have almost forgotten. To be present without self-accusation. To be awake without being hunted by expectation. To breathe without feeling behind. The old texts also help us feel the human body as part of the world rather than apart from it. Earth in the flesh, stone in the bones, wind in the breath, light in the eyes. The details vary in the old traditions, but their effect is the same. Adam belongs to creation while standing under the hand of the Creator. He is not lost in nature, and he is not severed from it. He is held within a meaningful order. That too is restful, especially in an age when so many people feel divided from their own bodies, angry at them, suspicious of them, exhausted by them. The beginning speaks more gently. It says, "You were made with care. You were not thrown here." Stay with that thought a little longer. Not because we are trying to turn the body into a theory, but because many troubled nights begin in the body. A tight chest, a clenched jaw, a forehead that will not let go, shoulders still holding a conversation from 12 hours ago. But the story meets the body at its beginning and says, before all your tension, there was breath. Before all your striving, there was gift. Before all your shame, there was life received in peace. Sometimes the most healing thing is not a new idea, but an older one remembered at the right hour. And so the suspense of the story changes shape here. In the first section, we wondered what the world was like before it grew loud. Now we wonder what a human life felt like before it learned to brace itself. What did Adam's breathing sound like when it was still close to the first mercy? What did awareness feel like before it became anxious? What was it to look at the world before the world had become difficult to trust? These are quiet questions, but they pull the listener deeper, not toward alarm, toward wonder. The wonder is enough. We do not need to force more from it. Let Adam remain in the freshness of that first life. Let him stand there a little longer, not as a theological problem, not as a symbol under pressure, but as the first living man receiving the calm of being made. And while he stands there, let your own breathing settle by small degrees. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slowly, no force, no proving, just life moving in and out. A quiet mercy repeated. Soon the story will widen again. It will move toward companionship, toward the quiet answer to loneliness, toward the first shared human peace. But before it does, keep one hand on this moment. The first breath was not earned. The first life was not self-made. The first human began in nearness. And if the beginning of humanity could be both sacred and calm, then perhaps your own descent toward sleep does not need to be dramatic either. Perhaps it may come softly. Perhaps it may come while you are no longer trying to force it. Perhaps it may come the way Adam first breathed. Received, not seized. Now companionship begins to enter the scene, and with it the deep calm of a world not yet taught to defend itself. This is one of the quiet mercies of the beginning. Adam and Eve come before us, not first as the center of catastrophe, but as the first shared human peace. Before blame, before hiding, before the sharpness of accusation, there is simply the grace of two lives given to one another under God. Eve enters the imagination tonight as gift, not disruption, as nearness, not noise, as the answer to solitude, not the beginning of disorder. That is important, because many retellings move too quickly toward the wound and do not let the beauty of companionship breathe. But the beauty matters. The world before argument is not empty of meaning. It is full of it. The first pair are together without strategy, together without performance, together without the need to manage impressions. Their peace does not need to become dramatic in order to be deep. Try to imagine that kind of nearness, not the exhausting nearness of modern life, where people often come carrying armor and suspicion and quiet bargaining, but a nearness that does not make the body tense, a nearness that does not ask you to edit yourself before you can be seen, a nearness in which being known is not the prelude to being wounded. That is part of the garden's peace as well. Not only trees and light and sacred ground, but human relation before fear learned to sit between faces. Jubilees remembers Adam and his wife in the garden without shame. It is a short phrase, but it holds a whole climate of the soul. Without shame means the body is not yet at war with itself. Without shame means visibility is not yet pain. Without shame means presence can still be simple. No shrinking, no recoil, no frantic need to cover what has suddenly become unbearable. Just the clear ease of being alive before God and before one another. That is not a small thing. It may be one of the rarest things the human imagination can still name. Many people do not know what such ease feels like. They know how to be efficient. They know how to be charming. They know how to stay busy enough to avoid hearing their own deeper fears. But they do not know how to be unguarded. They do not know how to exist in front of another person without some hidden tightening in the chest. They do not know what it is to be seen without instantly preparing a defense. So this early scene matters, especially at night. It gives the tired imagination a place where openness has not yet become dangerous. Adam and Eve's companionship is made of ordinary holiness, a path walked together, a shared gaze, the daily life of presence. No spectacle, no dramatic speeches, no strain. And this ordinary holiness is one reason the story can calm the mind. The modern world constantly tells us that only what is loud is meaningful. Only what is extreme is memorable. Only what is urgent deserves attention. But the garden says otherwise. Meaning glows quietly. Peace has depth. Ordinary life can be holy enough to hold the soul without exhausting it. That is good news for a weary listener, especially if you have spent the day inside pressures that made everything feel transactional. Every message needing an answer. Every conversation carrying some hidden demand. Every relationship feeling one interruption away from tension. The beginning offers another human atmosphere. Trust before fracture. Closeness before strategy. Love before fear. And even if you cannot fully imagine living there, you can rest beside the idea of it. Sometimes rest begins not by solving reality, but by inhabiting a gentler one for a while. There is suspense here too, but it is quieter than most stories would allow. We know the world will not remain like this forever. That knowledge hums in the background, but it does not yet dominate the scene. Instead, it makes the present peace feel precious. Every simple moment glows a little more, because it is still whole. Every ordinary act carries an unspoken tenderness, because it is still unbroken. This is the hush before the wound, and hush has its own gravity. So see Adam and Eve now, in that peace, walking without fear, seen without shame, living without the pressure to justify their existence. The world around them has not yet turned sharp, and the world within them has not yet split into hidden parts. They belong to the day and to one another without argument. Perhaps that is why this section must remain quiet. It would betray the scene to tell it loudly. Some truths can only be carried in a lowered voice. If loneliness is near you tonight, let this part of the story touch it gently. Not by pretending every ache will disappear, not by forcing comfort where grief still lives, but by reminding the heart that the longing for safe nearness is not foolish. It is deeply human. The beginning itself honors it. Companionship was gift from the start. To want peace with another person is not weakness. To long for a presence that does not exhaust you is not immaturity. It may be one of the clearest signs that your soul still remembers Eden in fragments. And now, the story is preparing to slow time itself. The old text will count days. It will pause before entrance. It will let waiting stand in the doorway of paradise. That too is part of the beginning's wisdom. But before we follow the counted days, linger here one more moment. The world before argument, the body before shame, the first pair before blame, a peace not yet chased from the ground, a companionship simple enough to steady the breath, a holiness gentle enough to let the tired soul unclench. Jubilees gives us a detail that changes the whole rhythm of the beginning. It says that Adam completed 40 days in the land where he had been created before he was brought into the Garden of Eden to till and keep it. 40 days. Not an instant entrance, not a rushed arrival, a measured waiting. And because the story keeps that number, the listener is invited to enter a slower kind of time. Imagine Adam under the open sky before Eden receives him. The earth beneath him is the earth of his own making. The air above him is clear and wide. The day rises, the day fades, night comes without threat. Then morning returns. He is alive, but not yet in the garden, held, but still waiting. And in that waiting, there is no sign that he has been forgotten. The pause is not neglect, it is order. The interval is part of the care. This is difficult for the modern heart to trust. We are so used to reading delay as rejection. If something does not happen quickly, we assume it is slipping away from us. If a door does not open at once, we begin to fear it is locked forever. But Adam's 40 days say something gentler. Not yet is not always no. Pause is not always punishment. There are weights that diminish the soul, yes, but there are also weights that prepare it. And this first waiting in the story feels like preparation bathed in calm. Perhaps Adam learned the sky in those days. Perhaps he learned the changing angle of light. Perhaps he learned how evening settles without asking permission. Perhaps he learned how to stand in a world that did not yet accuse him of doing too little. The text does not tell us everything, and that silence is kind. It leaves room for rest. It allows the imagination to dwell there without being crowded. A young world, a first man, an open sky, 40 measured days in the land where he was created. The simplicity of it is part of its beauty. And notice what comes before the task. Before Adam is told to till and keep the garden, there is this span of waiting. Before work, breath. Before assignment, time. Before stewardship, stillness. That matters, especially for those who have learned to think of themselves only in terms of usefulness. The first man is not immediately reduced to output. He is first allowed to live, to breathe, to exist under heaven before labor is placed in his hands. The beginning refuses the lie that value starts only when productivity starts. Maybe that is one reason this part of the story feels healing. Many people are exhausted not only because they have done too much, but because they have forgotten how to exist without measuring themselves by what they accomplish. Even at rest, they feel accused. Even in bed, they feel behind. Even in prayer, they hear the clock ticking somewhere in the back of the mind. But Adam under the open sky is not behind. He is exactly where the story has placed him. He is not late to his life. He is inside its first patient order. 40 days also carries a quiet gravity. Later, Scripture will teach us to hear 40 as a number of preparation, wilderness, testing, change. But here, at the beginning, it does not thunder. It rests lightly in the text. 40 days in the land where he was created. Even the phrase feels earthy and calm. Adam does not become holy by escaping creatureliness. He waits on the earth that formed him. He remains a creature under God, and that is enough. Sometimes the soul is healed not by being taken out of its limits, but by learning that its limits are not outside God's care. If you have been waiting for something tonight, something small or something large, stay near Adam here. If you have been mistaking slowness for abandonment, let the story soften that fear. If you have been angry with your own unfinishedness, listen to the open sky. Listen to the earth beneath the first man's feet. Listen to the unhurried count of days. The story does not despise the interval. It blesses it by keeping it. And what the story keeps, you may rest inside for a while. Soon the garden will appear more clearly. Soon the threshold will open. Soon Adam will enter the place he has been given to tend. But the beauty of the beginning is that it does not drag him there at speed. It allows time to remain time. And because it does, the entrance will feel more sacred when it comes. Perhaps that is true in more of life than we realize. The things entered too quickly are often poorly received, but what is approached with patience may be received with reverence. So stay one more moment with Adam beneath the open heaven. The first light and the first night passing over him. The breathing still simple. The future still quiet. The task not yet laid upon him. The garden ahead, but not anxiously so. And let your own body learn from that measured calm. Let the shoulders drop. Let the forehead smooth. Let the mind believe, even if only for a minute, that waiting can be held by God without becoming empty. And now the story becomes more delicate still. For Jubilees says not only that Adam entered after 40 days, but that Eve entered on the 80th day. A longer interval, a wider waiting. And because of that, this section must be handled gently, not harshly, not as a weapon, but as part of the old story's careful pacing. Imagine Eve before the garden in her own measured time, not forgotten, not secondary in worth, not standing outside blessing as though she were unwanted, simply waiting longer beneath the same sky, within the same divine order, moving through a span of days that asks more patience of her than it asked of Adam. The difference matters. The ache in it can be felt, and yet the text preserves the number without stripping Eve of dignity. Her waiting is real, but so is her belonging. The longer count does not erase the coming welcome. Many people know this ache by other names, watching others arrive while you remain in the not yet. Seeing doors open for someone else while yours stays closed a little longer. Feeling the strange loneliness of a promise that has not failed, but has not yet ripened either. If that ache lives anywhere in you tonight, then Eve's place in the story may meet it with unusual mercy. Because the old text does not push past her delay as though it were nothing. It keeps the number. It honors the interval. It lets longer remain longer. And there is kindness in that honesty. Not every waiting is the same. Some waits are short and sharp. Some are slow and quiet. Some are painful because they keep forcing comparison into the room. Why not yet for me? Why sooner for someone else? Why this larger number? The beginning does not answer every one of those questions, but it does give the waiting soul a companion. Eve is not absent from the story while she waits. She is held within it, and that is no small comfort. To be in the story even before the gate opens, to be remembered before arrival, to be named before entrance. Perhaps that is what some weary hearts need most. Not an instant solution, not cheerful denial, but the assurance that they have not been misplaced by God in the slower chapter. Eve's longer waiting says that the delayed soul is still seen, still counted, still moving, day by day, toward the place prepared. The interval does not mean she is outside divine regard. It simply means the story is unfolding at a pace not chosen by urgency. And while that does not make waiting easy, it can make waiting less cruel. Imagine her beneath the wide heavens, morning after morning, evening after evening, the count rising, the threshold still ahead, and yet the future remains real. She will enter. That matters. The waiting is not final. The larger number is not a verdict. The garden has not disappeared because the days are many. Belonging is not measured by speed. For some listeners, that sentence may be enough to carry into sleep. Belonging is not measured by speed. There is also a hidden tenderness here for those who fear that delay has made them less worthy. It has not. The soul that waits longer is not a lesser soul. The person whose healing took longer is not a lesser person. The one whose prayer lingered in silence longer than another's is not less beloved. The beginning will not allow us to read worth from the clock. That is one of its quiet mercies. In a loud world, speed often pretends to be proof. But the garden stands farther ahead than that lie. The garden waits for the one whose days were many too. And now, the suspense grows softer, deeper. The gate is nearer. The eastern brightness is beginning to form in the distance. Adam has known his 40 days. Eve has known her 80. The story has kept both counts with care. Soon the waiting will give way to entrance. Soon the threshold will become crossing. Soon the first pair will stand within Eden together. But before that happens, the slower heart is being honored. The longer road is being named without contempt. The soul that waited beyond expectation is being gathered into the story with full dignity. So if you're tired tonight from living in the longer waiting, let this section hold you gently. You are not wrong for feeling the ache of it. You are not faithless because comparison has hurt you. You are not weak because the not yet has taken time to soften into trust. Stay with Eve under the open sky. Stay with the counted days. Stay with the promise that has not disappeared simply because it has delayed. Longer does not mean lost. Longer does not mean forgotten. Longer does not mean unloved. And in the next part of the story, the waiting will begin to open. The path toward the garden will grow clearer. The threshold will come into view. The first life of Eden will begin. But for now, let the larger number breathe. Let the ache beneath it be spoken softly and then laid down. Let the night receive it. Let your own restless thoughts grow less crowded in its presence. Because sometimes the heart sleeps best, not when every question is answered, but when one deep fear has been named and gently eased. And tonight that fear is this, that the longer waiting meant you were left behind. The story answers quietly, no, not left behind, only still on the way. Not quickly, not all at once. The old story has taught us better than that. Adam has known the wide sky. Eve has known the longer count. And now, with the patience of the beginning still resting over everything, the path turns eastward. Imagine the first approach to Eden not as a sudden leap, but as a gradual brightening, a place becoming clearer before it is entered, a holiness first sensed in the air before it is understood by the mind. Perhaps the ground changes little by little. Perhaps the wind begins to carry a fragrance that was not there before. Perhaps the silence becomes more deliberate, not emptier, but more complete, as if even creation knows it is nearing a place set apart. The garden does not need to advertise itself. It is known by the peace that gathers around it. This is one of the mercies of the old texts. They allow paradise to feel approached, not grabbed, not stormed, not consumed with impatient eyes. Approached. And when something holy is approached slowly, it becomes easier for the heart to receive it without violence. Many people ruin even good gifts by hurrying into them with a hungry mind. They want to master the moment before it has opened. They want to explain the mystery before it has had time to become beautiful. But the Eastern Garden asks for another posture, a softer step, a lower voice, a willing delay. Imagine Adam walking toward Eden with the memory of the open sky still in him. Imagine Eve coming toward the same garden after the longer waiting, not bitter, not erased, but ripened by time. The path itself becomes part of the blessing. Each step says what the waiting had already begun to teach. What is holy is not diminished by being entered reverently. It is made more luminous by it. The one who rushes arrives full of himself. The one who has waited arrives able to notice. Tonight, as you listen, perhaps that is what your own tired heart needs most. Not another idea to collect, but a quieter way of arriving where grace has already been preparing a place for you. The imagination may see the garden now at a little distance. Not every detail at once, only hints. A brightness among trees, a depth of green that seems older than ordinary growth. A stillness that does not suppress life, but gathers it into order. This is not a wild tangle. This is not beauty without shape. This is a prepared place, a place with intention in it, a place with welcome in it, a place where the hand of God is not hidden behind chaos, but quietly visible in arrangement, in abundance, in calm. Perhaps that is why the garden remains so powerful in the spiritual imagination, not merely because it is lost later, but because it represents order without harshness. Many people know order only as pressure, rules, deadlines, measurements, correction. But Eden offers another form of order, fruit in season, ground fit for keeping, boundaries that protect rather than humiliate. Life arranged in such a way that peace may dwell there without strain. A tired soul, hearing that, begins to realize how much it longs for order that does not wound. The air near Eden is not empty of sound, yet whatever sound belongs there does not jar. The old remembrance that creatures once spoke with one lip and one tongue begins to feel more plausible here, not because the mind has solved it, but because the atmosphere of harmony makes such speech seem at home. If all things were once more deeply at peace, then perhaps their voices too once carried peace. Not loudness, not scramble, not the crowded collision of broken wills. Peace, the kind of peace in which every sound fits inside a larger music. And perhaps for that reason, the approach to Eden itself feels like drawing near to a place where nothing is trying to overpower anything else. Think of how different that is from the life many people live now. Rooms full of interruption, screens full of urgency, thoughts full of unfinished edges, days in which every alarm seems to insist that what matters most must be handled immediately. No wonder the soul grows restless. No wonder sleep becomes difficult. No wonder the mind, once finally laid down in the dark, keeps behaving as though it must stay on guard. But the Eastern Garden speaks in another register. Its peace is not empty. It is ordered enough that the body can stop clenching for a while. It is beautiful enough that the mind can loosen its grip on explanation. It is quiet enough that the heart may remember it was not made only for emergency. And as the path continues, there is suspense in the gentlest sense, not fear, expectation. What will it feel like to pass from waiting into welcome? What will it feel like for Adam after 40 days to be let in? What will it feel like for Eve after the longer interval to follow into the same holy place? What happens to a human face when it first beholds a peace it was made to inhabit? These questions do not agitate the night. They deepen it. They draw the listener farther in, not by force, but by wonder. Wonder is one of the softest ways the soul can be awakened and then gently laid down again. The garden is closer now. You can almost feel its coolness before touching it, almost sense the weight of shade beneath its trees, almost hear the gentleness in the movements of living things there, and still the story does not rush. It keeps honoring approach. It keeps honoring the threshold. It keeps teaching that one of the most sacred things a human being can learn is how to arrive without violence. Perhaps even your own sleep tonight may come that way. Not seized, approached. A soft entering, a quiet yielding, a slow crossing from effort into rest. So stay on the path a moment longer. Do not step through too soon. Let the eastern light remain partly hidden behind the leaves. Let the fragrance come before full sight. Let anticipation remain clean and calm. The garden is there. It is real in the story. It is near now. And the same patience that led Adam and Eve through their waiting is leading you through this listening. One breath at a time. One image at a time. One soft step deeper into the beginning. Every holy place has a threshold, and Eden is no different. A place set apart is often entered by more than distance. It is entered by a change in atmosphere, a narrowing of attention, a quieting of the self. And so now, dear friends, we come to the gate of a gentler world. Not a gate of iron, not a gate of threat, a threshold of difference. A line between the broader earth and the garden prepared for keeping. The old memory does not speak of this gate as modern people might. It does not turn it into theater. Yet the imagination can feel it. There comes a point in the approach when Adam is no longer merely heading east. He is arriving. There comes a point when Eve is no longer simply passing through counted days. She is drawing close to the place where the waiting will open into presence. A threshold is that strange and beautiful thing where something has not fully happened yet and yet is already changing everything. That is why thresholds stay with us. A wedding door, a hospital hallway, the first cry of a child not yet held, the final minutes before dawn, the moment before sleep finally takes the body. Thresholds hum with meaning. Imagine Adam at the edge of Eden. The ground beneath him is still earth, and yet he knows he is no longer simply standing in the land of his creation. Something is different. The garden ahead bears holiness in a way even the wider good earth does not quite bear it. Jubilees says that Eden was holier than all the earth besides. That single idea changes the texture of the scene. Adam is not just entering beauty. He is entering concentrated sacredness. He is crossing into a place where gift has gathered itself more closely, where abundance has been set in order, where the nearness of God feels somehow nearer still. And what does a human soul do at such a gate? Perhaps it becomes quiet. Perhaps it stops reaching ahead of itself. Perhaps it leaves off the restless habit of demanding to know everything before it steps forward. The Gate of Eden teaches the creature how to receive before possessing, how to enter before analyzing, how to stand at the edge of wonder without reducing it to immediate utility. That lesson remains desperately needed. So many people cannot enjoy what is good because they arrive already trying to master it. But the garden cannot be entered that way. The heart must soften. The step must slow. The voice must lower. Imagine Eve at that same threshold in her own time. The longer waiting has not hardened her into suspicion. The delay has not turned her soul to stone. She arrives not as one who has been denied too long, but as one who has been led, even through the ache of longer days, toward a real welcome. That is why the gate matters. It is where waiting and fulfillment meet without canceling each other. The waiting was real. The entrance is real too. The gate stands there as the place where longing first begins to exhale. How many hearts, even now, need such a place? A place where fear does not disappear by being mocked, but by being gently overtaken by the reality of welcome. A gentler world lies on the other side. That phrase matters. Not merely a more beautiful one, not merely a more abundant one, a gentler one, gentle in its rhythms, gentle in its order, gentle in the way labor and fruit and companionship live together, gentle even in its holiness, because holiness here has not yet become associated with judgment in the anxious human imagination. It is still experienced as nearness, blessing, arrangement, life. The gate is the last edge before the first pair learn paradise from the inside. There is suspense here too, but it does not shout. It draws the listener nearer with questions that breathe rather than push. What was the first feeling of entering Eden? Did the air change on the skin? Did the light beneath the trees feel deeper? Did the body know before the mind that it had crossed into a more sacred place? Did Adam sense the garden's peace as relief, or as wonder, or as both at once? Did Eve feel the longer waiting dissolve at the threshold? Not erased, but fulfilled. These questions are enough to hold the mind without exhausting it. They are doors left slightly open, letting calm curiosity move through. The gate is also where the wider human story narrows into intimacy. Before this, the beginning has been large. Creation, breath, sky, waiting, approach. Now it becomes local, placed, situated. There is a garden. There is work to do in it. There are trees to live among. There is fruit to gather. There is a life to be inhabited, not merely admired. That too is part of paradise. The holy is not abstract. It gives itself to particular places, particular rhythms, particular obediences. The gate of a gentler world is the opening into that particularity. And perhaps your own rest tonight needs a threshold as well. Perhaps the day cannot simply be switched off. Perhaps it must be left behind by degrees. A thought released here, a tension loosened there, a breath slowed, a shoulder softened, a heart convinced, little by little, that it no longer has to keep watch over everything. The story, by honoring Eden's gate, teaches even the body how to cross more gently from one condition into another, from hurry into patience, from noise into quiet, from clenched wakefulness into trust. So, stay at the threshold another moment. Do not rush the crossing. Let the gate itself bless you. Let it remind you that the soul was not made to live always in emergency. Let it remind you that holy things are often entered slowly. Let it remind you that gentleness is not weakness, but one of the ways God teaches creatures how to receive what they could never force open. And when, in your own hidden way, you are ready, the step forward will come. Not violently, not anxiously, simply with the quiet certainty that the garden on the other side is real. Now the crossing has happened. Adam has entered. Eve has entered. The first pair stand within Eden, and almost immediately, the old story does something beautiful. It gives them work, not punishing work, not endless work, not frantic work designed to prove their value. It gives them a garden to till and keep. And in that single phrase, paradise becomes even more beautiful because it becomes livable. Many people imagine perfection as passivity, a place where nothing is asked, nothing touched, nothing tended. But Eden is not a museum. It is a garden, a living place, and living places invite care. To till and keep is not to endure punishment. It is to participate in order, to help preserve what has been given, to live inside blessing actively rather than lazily. There is a deep peace in that. A human being made not for exploitation, not for exhaustion, but for stewardship. The task itself is gentle enough to fit the place. The place itself is abundant enough to make the task a joy rather than a burden. Imagine Adam learning the garden not as a territory to conquer, but as a trust to receive. The ground yields because it is meant to. The paths reveal themselves by use. The trees stand not as problems to solve, but as companions in the ordered life of paradise. To till and keep in such a place would not have meant strain in the way we know strain. It would have meant attention, rhythm, care, the kind of bodily participation that deepens peace rather than draining it. A hand to the earth, a step along a known path, a watchfulness that does not exhaust the mind because it grows out of love rather than anxiety. And Eve shares this life. The old text speaks of Adam and his wife in the garden, gathering fruit and setting aside what remained. Even here the picture is wonderfully ordinary. They do not float through paradise as if holiness had erased daily life. They live, they tend, they gather, they keep. That is one reason the scene can steady us so deeply. It does not say that peace requires escape from embodied rhythm. It says peace can dwell inside embodied rhythm when the world is ordered rightly. The garden is not less sacred because it involves work. The work is one of the ways its sacredness becomes daily. What a needed correction that is. Many tired people know only two forms of labor. Either labor as burden or the fantasy of life without labor at all. But Eden offers a third possibility. Labor as harmony. Labor as participation in goodness. Labor that does not steal the soul from itself. Labor without humiliation. Labor without burnout. Labor that fits the body, because the body is not yet fighting its place in the world. That lost form of work still haunts human memory. Perhaps, which is why so many people ache not merely for rest from labor, but for redeemed labor. Not no work, but good work. Work that does not turn the heart hard. The garden they were given to keep is also a sign that love trusts creatures with something real. God does not place Adam and Eve into paradise as spectators only. He places them there as keepers. This is dignity, not the dignity of status anxiety, not the dignity of being above someone else, the quieter dignity of being entrusted. And entrusted work differs from imposed burden. Burden crushes. Entrustment invites response. Burden makes the body dread the day. Entrustment gives the day shape. Even now, many hearts long for that difference and do not know how to name it. Imagine the mornings of Eden, the first pair waking under trees and light in a place already prepared. No panic at dawn, no rush to prove they deserve to remain. Only the day unfolding its tasks with calm clarity. A garden to tend, fruit to gather, paths to walk, shade to pass under. The very ordinariness of such mornings is part of their sweetness. They do not need spectacle because their peace is enough. How different from lives in which only crisis feels real. Eden says, no, quiet order can be real too. Quiet faithfulness can fill a day. Simple care can be holy. There is suspense in this section as well, though it is low and warm rather than sharp. What did the first tasks feel like? What did Adam touch first? What did Eve notice first from within the garden rather than from outside it? What did it mean to discover paradise through keeping it rather than merely looking at it? Perhaps that is another hidden wisdom here. Many of the deepest goods are only learned through care, not by distance, not by theory, by keeping, by tending, by returning. The garden reveals itself to those who live faithfully inside it. And as you listen, perhaps some part of your own tired life is being reinterpreted. Not every daily act is empty because it repeats. Not every rhythm is dull because it is familiar. Some repetitions are healing. Some routines keep the soul from scattering. Some forms of care, precisely because they recur, become the quiet architecture of peace. The garden they were given to keep helps us imagine a world in which repetition is not deadness, but fidelity. A world in which the same path under the same trees may still be beautiful because love walks it again. If you have grown weary of the kind of work that empties you, stay here. Let Eden give you another image of labor. A body moving without panic, hands occupied, without being consumed. A task received as part of belonging rather than proof of worth. The garden did not ask Adam and Eve to become machines. It invited them to become faithful keepers. There is gentleness in that invitation, and perhaps your own body can borrow some of it tonight. The shoulders do not need to brace so hard. The breath does not need to hurry. The heart does not need to measure its value by speed. The first work in paradise was not driven by fear. And for a little while, listening to this, your own inner life need not be driven by fear either. Once the garden has been entered and the work has begun, the old story gives us one of its most tender images. Adam and Eve gather the fruit. They eat. They set aside what remains, and they do all this without shame. The sentence is simple, but its peace is enormous. Daily life, nourishment, companionship, and innocence all held together in one scene. No hiding, no scrambling, no self-division, only the ordinary grace of receiving what the garden yields. Imagine fruit in Eden, not as a symbol first, but as a gift. Weight in the hand, color under the shade of leaves, fragrance carried softly in the air, the pleasure of a ripe thing picked at the right time. The satisfaction of hunger met without anxiety. Adam and Eve do not seize from a starved world. They gather from abundance, and abundance changes the body. It softens the hand. It quiets the eye. It teaches the heart not to clutch. A world of gift produces a different kind of motion than a world of scarcity. Even the act of gathering becomes gentler when fear has not yet entered it. And there is something deeply healing in the detail that they set aside the residue for themselves. It suggests order. It suggests rhythm. It suggests a life in which receiving, using, and preserving happen without strain. They are not frenzied consumers. They are not anxious hoarders. They are inhabitants of a place whose goodness gives rise to calm habits. The soul hears that and longs for it almost immediately. How many lives have become disordered not because people lack desire for peace, but because fear has taught them to clutch at what is good too tightly. But in Eden, there is no need yet for clutching. The garden keeps giving. So the first pair may gather without panic, without shame. That phrase returns like cool water. Without shame in the body. Without shame in hunger. Without shame in being visible while receiving what is needed. Think of how much human anguish lives right there now. People ashamed of their need. Ashamed of their bodies. Ashamed of wanting rest, food, touch, tenderness, quiet. Ashamed of being creatures at all. But the garden remembers another condition. Need without humiliation. Embodiment without self-loathing. Eating without guilt. Presence without fear of exposure. To hear such a thing at night is almost to feel an old knot loosening. Perhaps that is why the scene must not be rushed. The first pair, gathering fruit, is not a small detail on the way to a larger story. It is part of the larger story, a revelation of what human life looked like before desire turned desperate, before receiving became tangled with fear, before the soul learned to hide from its own hunger by calling hunger weakness. Adam and Eve do not apologize for being creatures. They do not apologize for eating. They do not apologize for living from what God has given. That innocence is one of the quiet glories of Eden. Imagine the sound of the garden during such a gathering. Leaves moving, fruit lifted free from stem, soft footfall on prepared ground. the murmur of a world still at peace with itself. Perhaps the speaking creatures are near in ways the mind cannot fully reconstruct, not intruding, not crowding, only participating in the harmony of a place where living things have not yet been taught to fear one another's presence. Everything is ordered enough that nothing needs to shout. Even nourishment happens calmly. Even bodily need is folded into peace. For a restless listener, that is a mercy almost beyond words. And then there is the sharedness of it. Adam and Eve gather together. This matters. The first human nourishment in paradise is not solitary grasping. It belongs to companionship, to shared life, to the ordinary practice of inhabiting abundance together. There are forms of loneliness so deep that even eating becomes isolating. But not here. Not yet. In Eden, daily life is communal without strain. Their being together does not increase anxiety. It deepens ease. A modern heart that has known relational exhaustion may hardly know how to imagine such a thing. Yet the imagination can still rest beside it. And sometimes that is enough. The suspense hidden in this section is subtle. How long can innocence remain this gentle? How long can daily life stay this clean? We know there is sorrow ahead, but it has not arrived yet. And because we know it, the present scene grows even more precious. A fruit held in unashamed hands, a meal received in peace, a shared life not yet bruised by accusation, the quiet before the loudness to come. Every small act in Eden gleams more brightly because it has not yet been darkened by fear. That is why we linger, not to deny what follows, but to honor what was. If you have ever felt ashamed of being tired, let this section speak to you. If you have ever felt guilty for needing to be fed, for needing care, for needing rest, for needing more than your own strength can supply, then sit here a little longer in the garden. Let Adam and Eve teach you how unashamed creatures once received their lives. Need was not disgrace. Dependence was not failure. Hunger did not make them weak. It simply made them human. And the garden was prepared to answer it. Perhaps your own night may answer your tiredness that way too. Not by scolding it, by meeting it. So watch them gather the fruit once more. Calm hands, clear eyes, no haste, no hidden accusation. The gift is enough. The day is enough. The companionship is enough. And because the story gives you this image so quietly, perhaps your own breathing has begun to quiet with it. The body in bed no longer has to argue with its need. The heart no longer has to apologize for wanting peace. The garden keeps offering what is necessary, and in the listening dark, that generosity is beginning to feel possible again. By now we have seen Adam and Eve waiting, approaching, entering, keeping, and gathering. And from these small but luminous details, a larger picture begins to emerge. Paradise is not only trees and fruit and holy ground. It is also the rhythm of two lives lived together in peace. This is one of the most quietly beautiful parts of the story. Not events, but rhythm. Not spectacle, but companionship repeated over days until repetition itself becomes a form of rest. The modern world is very bad at honoring rhythm. It loves interruption, novelty, urgency, and emotional noise. It wants every day to prove itself by extremity. But the garden teaches another pattern. Day after day, Adam and Eve inhabit a gifted life together. The same paths, perhaps. The same shade under trees. The same labor of keeping. The same receiving of fruit. The same nearness of one body to another without fear. And none of this is boring. It is beautiful, because peace does not need constant reinvention. Peace deepens through faithfulness. Imagine them moving through a morning in Eden. One walks ahead a little, then slows. The other comes alongside. A hand reaches toward a branch. A face turns toward light filtering through leaves. A word may be spoken, or perhaps a silence shared, and neither is heavy. In a loud world, silence between people often feels strained, but in paradise, silence can belong to ease. It can be another form of companionship, not the absence of connection, but its calm maturity. Adam and Eve do not need to fill every space with speech in order to confirm love. Their peace is spacious enough to include quiet. This is deeply restful to imagine, especially for anyone whose relationships have become crowded with performance. Many people are tired not only from tasks, but from interaction itself. Too much explaining, too much managing, too much emotional weather, too much of the hidden work of keeping connection alive in a world where fear has entered so many rooms. But the first pair before the breaking are spared that burden. Their closeness is not a negotiation. It is a dwelling. And because it is a dwelling, the soul listening can settle a little lower into the pillow. It no longer has to brace for conflict in every shared scene. The soft rhythm of two lives also reveals how holiness can become domestic without becoming small. We often imagine sacredness as something far removed from ordinary patterns, but Eden says otherwise. Sacredness may live in repeated motions, in familiar ground, in daily kindness, in unhurried proximity. It may live in a shared life not yet fractured by the need to defend the self. That does not make the sacred less grand. It makes it more habitable, and many hearts need a habitable sacredness more than they need another overwhelming display. They need to know that peace can be lived in, not merely admired from a distance. Perhaps the most beautiful part of this rhythm is that it does not appear self-conscious. Adam and Eve are not yet asking how they look while they live. They are not curating an image of happiness. They are not anxiously verifying whether they are getting the garden right enough to deserve staying in it. They are simply in it. That simplicity has become almost unimaginable for many people. To live without constantly standing outside yourself and evaluating your own performance. To share life without mentally editing every movement. To be present without self-surveillance. But that is part of paradise too. The self has not yet split into actor and observer. It still knows how to belong wholly in the moment. The suspense that runs through this section is more emotional than narrative. How long can human rhythm remain this clean? How long can closeness remain free from strain? How long can repetition remain gentle rather than deadening? We ask these questions not to spoil the peace, but because the peace has become dear. When a listener begins to care about quiet, quiet acquires its own gravity. That is what has happened now. The calm of Eden no longer feels like background. It has become the heart of the story. And because it has, the mind begins to slow around it instead of racing ahead. If you have felt scattered by too many demands lately, stay with this rhythm. 2 lives, 1 garden. A day shaped by care rather than panic. The same good things returning without becoming stale. What if some of your deepest exhaustion comes from living too long without rhythm that heals? What if your body has been begging not only for rest, but for gentleness repeated? The garden offers that picture. A life in which the recurring is not the enemy of wonder. A life in which the familiar remains beautiful because love still fills it. And perhaps, without even noticing, your own breathing has started to imitate this rhythm. In, out, pause, again. No emergency in it. No self-accusation in it. Only repetition doing its quiet work. The body often learns by atmosphere before it learns by thought. So let the atmosphere of Eden teach you. Let the repeated peace of Adam and Eve soften whatever in you has come to expect only noise. Let the ordinary holiness of their companionship reassure the mind that not every silence is a problem waiting to happen. Some silences are where trust lives. Some repetitions are where love grows roots. Some rhythms are how paradise keeps time. Jubilees gives us another detail, as surprising as it is beautiful. Adam and his wife were in the Garden of Eden for 7 years, tilling and keeping it. 7 years. Not 7 moments. Not a flashing glimpse of innocence gone almost immediately. 7 years of life in the garden before the rupture. That number changes the whole emotional scale of the beginning. It tells us peace lasted long enough to become lived reality. Long enough to form memory. Long enough to fill seasons. Long enough to make paradise not merely possible, but inhabited. Imagine that. 7 cycles of evening and morning. 7 years of paths worn gently by faithful feet. 7 years of fruit gathered in order. 7 years of Adam and Eve learning one another within a world not yet damaged by shame. 7 years of creaturely life under divine peace. This is no tiny preface. This is a chapter of existence with breadth and texture. And because it lasted, the story becomes sadder later. Yes, but it also becomes more restful now. Paradise was not a rumor. It was a dwelling. Think of what 7 years means for the body. It means rhythms became familiar. The garden was not only seen, it was known. The trees were not only admired, they were lived among. Labor was not an experiment, it was a way of life. Companionship was not a first astonishment only. It ripened into shared habit. The speaking creatures, the ordered peace, the unashamed body, the holy nearness of Eden. All of it lasted long enough for the first pair to settle into it. That word matters. Settle. Many people no longer know what it is to settle in goodness. They know how to visit it briefly. They know how to glimpse it, but they do not know how to remain there long enough for it to shape them. The 7 years in Eden remind the heart that goodness was once durable. There is also a quiet perfection in the number 7 itself, a number of completeness, a number of fullness, a number that suggests a whole cycle brought to its proper finish. The old text may simply be preserving a count, but the count itself sings 7 years of paradise before sorrow speaks. 7 years of the first pair inside a peace not yet interrupted. 7 years during which labor, nourishment, companionship, and holiness remain in harmony. The soul listening at night hears that number and almost instinctively relaxes. Something about it feels round, finished, whole. A week enlarged into years. A completeness stretched into lived time. What were those years like? The text does not tell us every scene, and that restraint is a gift. It allows the imagination to move gently. Perhaps the same trees were passed 1,000 times without becoming dull. Perhaps certain places in the garden gathered affection through return. Perhaps Adam and Eve learned the small changes of light in different seasons, if seasons were felt there. Perhaps certain fruits became associated with particular times of quiet. Perhaps the creatures, speaking in their one tongue, made the garden feel companioned beyond human companionship. We do not need to press too hard on such questions. They are here to deepen atmosphere, not to burden the mind. The 7 years also protect the story from becoming too thin. Without them, one might imagine innocence as fragile from the start, almost unreal. But 7 years says no. Peace was not weak simply because it was later broken. Goodness was substantial. Order was livable. Harmony was not a passing trick of light. This matters spiritually. Many people begin to think that because grief is powerful, peace must always have been less real. But Eden refuses that lie. What is good may be lost without ever having been small. What is broken later may still have been deep, stable, and true while it lasted. Perhaps you need that reminder tonight, for reasons beyond the story. Perhaps there was a peace in your own life once that is gone now, and because it is gone, you have begun to doubt it was ever solid. But the garden says loss does not prove the earlier gift was imaginary. The 7 years say goodness may be remembered without embarrassment. You do not have to minimize beauty just because sorrow came after it. In fact, beauty honored truthfully can become one of the quiet places where the heart recovers, not by returning to what was, but by refusing to let pain rewrite all memory in its own image. There is suspense here too, for the number 7 carries a hush around what comes next. A completed span, a piece reaching its fullness. The listener senses, without the story yet having to shout, that something is drawing near beyond the edge of this section. But for now, we do not move there. We remain inside the 7 years. We let them breathe. We let paradise last for the full count the story gives it. To do otherwise would be to betray the kindness of the text. And kindness, tonight, is part of the whole point. So dwell there a little while. 7 years in Eden. Not rushing, not defending, not collapsing. The first pair under trees and light, keeping and tending, eating and setting aside, living without shame, listening to a world not yet divided against itself. If your own life has felt chopped into fragments, this image may be medicine, a long peace, a complete cycle, a goodness sturdy enough to inhabit. Let the body hear that and relax its arguments for a while. Let the mind stop interrupting every lovely thing with the fear that it cannot last. For this section at least, the story gives you 7 full years, and no one is taking them away too quickly. By now, the shape of paradise is becoming clear. Not only a garden, but a world whose inward reflexes have not yet been damaged. A world that had not learned to flinch. That phrase may be the best way to gather what has been spread across these sections. Adam does not flinch from God. Eve does not flinch from being seen. The body does not flinch from its own visibility. Creation does not flinch from itself. Even sound does not yet flinch into collision. The whole atmosphere carries an uninjured openness. To understand how beautiful that is, you almost have to feel the opposite. Most people flinch now. At criticism, at intimacy, at memory, at silence, at the possibility of being fully known. The body flinches before pain arrives because it remembers older pains. The mind flinches before rest arrives because it fears what quiet might uncover. The heart flinches before love deepens because it has learned how vulnerable love can become. Human life after the loudness has many forms of flinching, but Eden before the breaking has none of them yet, and that absence creates one of the gentlest atmospheres in all sacred story. Imagine what it means to move through a day without inner recoil, to hear a sound and not brace, to be looked at and not shrink, to step into work and not feel already behind, to feel hunger and not turn it into shame, to receive nearness and not immediately search for hidden danger. This is not merely innocence in the abstract. It is a body at peace with being alive, and the older one gets, the more miraculous that begins to seem. No wonder the soul responds so deeply to Eden. It hears, in faint memory, a condition it still longs for even when it cannot name it. The creatures speaking with one lip and one tongue belong here too. A world that does not flinch is a world in which speech has not yet become a weapon. The detail becomes less strange the longer we sit in the garden's peace. Of course, a whole creation at rest with itself might speak without sharpness. Of course, voices in such a place might arise inside harmony rather than fracture. The modern world trains us to assume that complexity must become conflict, but paradise suggests another possibility. Difference without hostility, sound without harm, presence without threat. That is what makes the memory so alluring. It is not simplistic, it is healed, and yet the healing is not presented as abstract perfection. It is embodied. Adam and Eve walk, work, gather, remain visible, speak, Rest. The garden is not a dream, because dreams often lack texture. This place has texture everywhere. Ground, underfoot, fruit in the hand, shade in the afternoon. The rhythm of two lives. The ordered life of creatures. A world that had not learned to flinch still had detail. And detail is what makes peace feel real enough to lie down beside. Many listeners may feel grief rising quietly here. Not sharp grief. A softer kind. The grief of realizing how much of life is now spent bracing. Bracing for interruption. Bracing for disappointment. Bracing for criticism. Bracing for the message that changes everything. Bracing even in bed, even in prayer, even in moments that should feel safe. If that grief comes, let it be gentle. Do not resist it too hard. Sometimes the heart relaxes by first noticing how long it has been tense. The garden can reveal that, not to wound further, but to invite release, to say, in effect, your flinching did not belong to the beginning. It was learned. And what is learned, in part, may one day be softened. There is suspense now, in a more interior sense. The listener has entered the piece deeply enough to fear its loss, even before the story reaches that point. That fear itself shows how persuasive the calm has become. We protect what we have come to love. And by now, the piece of Eden has become lovable. It has body, time, rhythm, companionship, work, nourishment, order, and speech, all arranged without violence. That is enough to make the soul cling. But for tonight, we are not yet called to loss. We are called to stay inside wholeness a little longer. That too is spiritual discipline. Not racing sorrow ahead of the text. Letting goodness be fully good while it is being told. So imagine one more day in a world that had not learned to flinch. Morning arrives, and nothing in Adam tightens against it. Eve walks, and nothing in her recoils from being known. The garden gives, and neither of them mistrusts the gift. The creatures move, and their life does not carry hidden hostility. The very air feels unguarded, not foolishly unguarded, but rightfully so, because fear has not yet entered to teach every living thing suspicion. And if the body hearing this wants to rest more deeply, let it. The story is making a safer room inside the night. Now we come to the wonder at the center of this meditation. The detail that opened the hook and has waited patiently behind everything else. Jubilees says that before expulsion, the mouths of beasts and cattle and birds and of whatever walks and moves were later closed, because before that they had all spoken one with another with one lip and one tongue. There it is. Strange, beautiful, almost impossible to picture fully, and yet once heard, impossible to forget. Do not try to master it too quickly. The old world often preserves truths by image before analysis, and this image carries immense spiritual weight. All living things speaking in one tongue, not necessarily saying the kinds of things modern minds would expect, not becoming cartoonish or trivial, rather participating in a shared communicative harmony that belonged to the first piece of creation. It is as though language itself had not yet been torn into competition, as though relation still flowed through the world more cleanly than it does now, as though sound had not yet grown loud in the way that woundedness later makes sound loud. Perhaps that is why this detail feels so powerful at night. The sleepless mind is often a field of competing tongues. One thought says fear, another says plan, another says remember, another says regret, another says prepare, another says you are still not enough. Inside one exhausted body, too many voices strain against one another. But the old memory answers with a different world. One lip, one tongue, a creation not yet at war with itself. And simply hearing that possibility can quiet the inner crowd, not by solving every thought, but by giving the mind a deeper pattern to rest inside. Imagine the garden under that condition. Birdsong, yes, but not as isolated noise. Creaturely sound, yes, but not as confusion. The world alive, with communication that did not fragment peace. Human beings hearing and being heard within a larger fabric of living relation. No wonder the place felt whole. No wonder the first pair could move through it without flinching. They were not standing in a world of disconnected lives. They were standing in a creation that still answered itself. The trees, the animals, the air, the labor, the bodies, the fruit, everything belonged to one ordered conversation under God. This is where the phrase, "before the world grew loud," becomes fullest. The loudness of the world is not only volume, it is fracture. It is the multiplying of voices that no longer know how to remain in harmony. It is speech becoming strain, desire becoming demand, relation becoming rivalry. The old line about one tongue tells us that paradise was not silent, but it was not loud in that broken sense either. It held many forms of life without turning them into noise. That is the difference the modern soul aches for, often without knowing how to describe it. Not the absence of all sound, but the healing of sound. Not emptiness, but concord. And there is suspense here unlike anywhere else in the story so far, because this wonder contains its own shadow. If the creatures later lost this speech when the first pair were expelled, then the harmony of Eden was more fragile than it first seemed. Not weak real, but vulnerable to rupture. We feel that now. The listener senses loss hovering far away, not yet entered, but now imaginable. And because loss has become imaginable, the present wonder shines brighter. That is one reason sacred texts preserve strange details. They intensify presence by hinting at what later disappears. The one tongue of creation becomes luminous partly because it will not remain. Still, tonight we are not yet at the closing of mouths. We are still in the time before it. So let the wonder remain whole. Let the birds still speak in peace. Let the creatures still belong to a shared sound. Let Adam and Eve still live within a world whose voices do not threaten one another. There is medicine in that restraint. The anxious mind wants to leap ahead to consequences, but the soul often heals by dwelling long enough in goodness to remember what goodness actually felt like. This section gives that permission. Stay before the loss. Stay before the closing. Stay with the one tongue a little longer. Perhaps this is also why prayer can feel possible here. A world in one tongue sounds like a world in right relation to its source. The first pair do not yet live in a creation full of static. Their listening has not yet been buried under contradiction. Prayer, then, would not be clawing its way through inner noise. It would belong to the same harmony everything else belonged to. And if that feels far from your own experience, let it not discourage you. Let it invite you instead. Even now, a divided heart may still move toward a deeper listening. Even now, the many tongues inside a weedy mind may slowly begin to quiet in the presence of a larger peace. So hear it once more. One lip, one tongue, the beasts, the cattle, the birds, whatever walks, whatever moves, all still sharing a world not yet broken into competing speech. And as you hear it, let your own inner world become less argumentative. Let the thoughts that do not need to speak fall back. Let the body hear one steadier rhythm. Let the breath become the simplest language in the room. In, out, again. The story has given you its strangest wonder. And instead of making the night louder, it has made the night more whole. The wonder of the one tongue leads naturally into a larger realization. Creation in Eden still answered itself gently. That may be the deeper truth inside the strange detail. The garden was not merely a collection of separate excellences. It was a responsive whole. Life met life without immediate distortion. The earth yielded. The trees fed. The creatures spoke in harmony. Human beings kept and gathered without shame. Everything answered something, and everything answered gently. This is perhaps the most restful vision of all. Think of how different that is from ordinary human experience now. A question is answered sharply. A need is answered late. A wound is answered with defensiveness. A voice is answered by a louder voice. So much of life has become escalation. But Eden, before the loudness, is the opposite. Response without violence. Motion without panic. Speech without injury. Relation without domination. Even the body is answered gently by the world around it. Hunger meets fruit. Work meets a keepable garden. Companionship meets openness. The soul hears such a pattern and knows immediately why it feels like home. It is the answer to strain. When creation still answered itself gently, time must have felt different too. Not empty, not rushed, full, but not crowded. A day had enough space in it for labor, for nourishment, for nearness, for quiet, for delight. Nothing had yet been swollen beyond its place. Nothing had yet become disproportionate. That is one of the things that makes the modern world so exhausting. Everything competes to feel ultimate. Every demand wants to become absolute. But paradise has proportion. Each part answers the others in order. And order without fear is one of the deepest forms of beauty. Perhaps the first pair felt this gentleness most in the body. A body that reaches for fruit and receives fruit. A body that works and is not crushed by the work. A body that is seen and does not recoil from being seen. A body that hears the world and is not startled into vigilance by every sound. If you have spent too long living in a body that feels like a site of tension, be kind to yourself as this section unfolds. The contrast may stir grief, but it may also stir hope, because the body's longing for gentleness is not foolish. It is rooted in something very old. The beginning itself bears witness that creaturely life was once held in a softer relation to the world. The gentleness of response also explains why the first pair could remain unashamed. Shame grows where response turns harsh, where the gaze wounds, where need is met with contempt, where the self becomes unsafe in the presence of another. But Eden is not yet such a world. The garden receives the first pair. God receives them. The creatures receive them. Their own bodies do not yet reject them. So shame has no soil in which to grow. This is not naivety. It is wholeness. And wholeness often looks unbelievable to those who have lived too long under fracture. Still, it remains beautiful enough to rest beside. There is suspense here as well, though now it is almost entirely spiritual. The more lovely the harmony becomes, the more the listener senses how much is at stake in it. A world answering itself gently is a treasure. A creation in order is a delicacy. A peace that includes speech, work, hunger, companionship, and holiness all at once is not a thin piece. It is rich, which means, of course, that its eventual rupture will matter deeply. But not yet. Tonight we are still receiving richness, still learning its shape, still letting the body believe, if only for a while, that life may answer it more softly than fear has led it to expect. If your own inner world has become harsh, let Eden's gentleness interrupt it. If the way you speak to yourself has grown cruel, let the garden answer you otherwise. If your days have been full of abrupt demands, let this older rhythm widen the space inside you. Not every answer must arrive as pressure. Not every correction must wound. Not every need must become a crisis. Creation once answered itself gently. That truth does not erase pain, but it can begin to retrain a tired imagination. And a retrained imagination is often one of the first gifts sleep brings. So remain here. The garden around the first pair. The creatures still at peace. The fruit still given. The work still fitting. The body still unashamed. The day still proportioned. God still near. And everything, from the smallest need to the widest order, answering itself without violence. If the mind wants to keep spinning, let it slow. If the chest wants to stay tight, let it ease. If the night has felt severe, let this section make it kinder. The beginning has not only shown you paradise, it has shown you the manner of paradise, and the manner is gentleness. After all that has been seen and felt, one final image gathers these sections together before we move on. The listening earth. The earth beneath Adam and Eve in Eden is not dead ground. It is not inert backdrop. It is responsive place, prepared place, bearing place. The first pair stand and walk and work upon an earth that seems almost to listen, to receive their steps without resentment, to yield to their keeping without resistance, to participate in a world still ordered by peace. This image matters because so many people now feel as though the ground of life itself has become hard to stand on. Imagine Eden's soil under bare feet, cool where shade has rested, warm where light has passed, firm enough to hold, soft enough to welcome, not hostile, not exhausted, not wounded into thorns and struggle. The earth listens in the sense that it answers rightly. Adam tends it, and it does not mock him. Eve walks it, and it does not bruise her with hidden sharpness. The first pair live upon a ground still in sympathy with the life above it. That sympathy is one of the quietest blessings in the whole story. It is easy to miss because the world we know has taught us not to expect it. A listening earth also means a world in which place still cooperates with presence. The garden is not at war with its keepers. They do not stand over against it as enemies or exploiters. They belong together. Human life and created ground still move in a kind of covenantal calm. That may be why the story feels so soothing when told slowly. It pictures a relation modern people desperately miss. Belonging without domination, not conquering the earth, not fleeing the earth, dwelling with it faithfully. The first pair are not abstract spirits wandering through sacred light. They are embodied keepers with earth underfoot. Paradise includes ground, and ground, when peaceful, can calm the body in ways ideas alone cannot. Think of how often anxiety feels like floating. Untethered thoughts, no firm place to stand, no sense of support beneath the swirl of inner noise. But the listening earth of Eden says otherwise. There is a place beneath you. There is ground that can hold you. There is a created order not built to mock your need for steadiness. Perhaps that is one reason nature, even in a damaged world, still helps many people sleep. Something in the body remembers that ground was once friendlier. Something in the soul remembers that to lie down on earth under God was not always an act of fear. The listening earth also gathers the themes of these sections into one final piece. Waiting has led to entrance. Entrance has led to keeping. Keeping has led to nourishment. Nourishment has unfolded within companionship. Companionship has ripened across 7 years. Those years have taken place in a world that had not yet learned to flinch. A world of one lip and one tongue. A world answering itself gently. Now all of that rests upon the same prepared ground. The story grows more convincing because it grows more embodied. The peace is not floating somewhere above human life. It is underfoot. It holds the day. It receives the body. It makes holy living local. There is a hush of suspense here as well. The more solid paradise becomes, the more the listener senses that this solid piece stands close to a turning we have not yet entered. But this last section before that turning gives us ground, and ground is exactly what the tired mind often needs. Not another concept, not another explanation. Ground. So let the earth of Eden hold you a little while. Feel its steadiness beneath the first pair. Feel the way it bears their ordinary life without strain. Feel the way it answers their care by remaining fruitful, ordered, ready. The listening earth is one more sign that creation was once hospitable all the way down. If your own life has felt unstable lately, do not rush past this image. If the mind has felt slippery under your own feet, if the days have felt like they move too quickly to stand on, let the garden offer you another sensation. Stable ground, prepared ground, ground that receives rather than rejects. Even listening to such an image can calm the nervous system. It tells the body that support is imaginable. It tells the heart that life is not meant to feel adversarial at every level. It tells the soul that beneath the noise there remains a deeper memory of being held. And so we end this movement of the story with Adam and Eve standing upon peaceful ground, the garden around them, the creatures still in harmony, and the fruit still sufficient, the years of peace still whole, the body still unashamed, the earth still listening. The beginning has become almost tangible now. You can feel it under the skin of the imagination. And if you are growing sleepier, let that be good news. The story has done what it was meant to do. It has not shouted. It has not pushed. It has led you, section by section, into a quieter world until your own inner world begins, at last, to answer a little more gently too. We come to something the modern soul often forgets. Holiness was not first experienced as threat. In the world before the wound, holiness did not drive Adam and Eve into the trees. It did not make their shoulders tighten. It did not send them searching for excuses, coverings, or distance. It was warmth without heat that harms. It was nearness without pressure. It was a reality so good, so settled, so steady, that the human heart could live inside it without flinching. That may be hard for many tired people to imagine. So much of life now feels evaluative. Rooms measure us. Screens measure us. Deadlines measure us. Even memory can feel like an examiner standing at the edge of the bed with folded arms. And so, when many people hear the word holy, they imagine scrutiny before comfort. They imagine a bright gaze exposing every weakness. But the first pair knew a different order. For them, the holy presence of God was the climate of life itself. It was where they breathed. It was where they walked. It was where they learned the shape of their own existence. Picture them at the edge of morning. Light does not strike the garden like a command. It gathers softly over leaf and branch. The ground gives back the coolness of night. The air is clear. Adam rises without dread. Eve rises without calculation. Neither of them begins the day by defending an image. Neither of them begins by fearing disappointment. They stand within a world where God has not withdrawn. They are not abandoned to make meaning out of emptiness. They are living within a given kindness. That is one of the deepest forms of shelter. And perhaps shelter is what many listeners need most tonight. Not merely rest in the sense of shutting the eyes, but a deeper shelter. The kind that lets the inner alarm slowly understand that it does not need to keep watch every second. The old memory of Eden offers exactly that. It tells us that before human life became suspicious, it was sheltered. Before it became strategic, it was sheltered. Before it learned to negotiate worth, it was sheltered. The soul hears this and, even if only for a moment, remembers a different possibility for being alive. In that first garden, holiness did not mean distance from tenderness. It meant tenderness perfected. It meant that reality itself had not yet split into sacred moments and ordinary ones. The tending of the garden was holy. The speaking of creatures was holy. The sharing of fruit was holy. The simple act of standing side by side under a tree while evening came down was holy. Nothing needed to be dramatized in order to be meaningful. The garden did not shout its sanctity. It simply held it, the way a lamp holds flame without strain. This is why the story matters for more than curiosity. It matters because many weary people have come to believe that God is nearest only in emergency, only in crisis, only in collapse. But Eden remembers another truth. God was near in peace. God was near in ordinary rhythm. God was near in untroubled companionship. God was near before anyone had tears to explain. That means divine nearness is not a rescue plan alone. It is also the original atmosphere of creaturely life. If your body has spent too long bracing itself, let this section soften that habit. Imagine Adam and Eve moving through the garden under a holiness that is more like a roof than a blade, more like a home than a courtroom. They are not hiding from the one who made them. They are learning that his presence is where they are most themselves. The grass does not fear the rain that feeds it. The trees do not fear the sun that warms them. In the same way, the first humans do not yet fear the God whose nearness gives them form. There is a quiet suspense in this, because the listener knows what they do not yet know. We know the story will darken. We know that fear will one day enter the space where ease once lived. We know that the sound of God walking will later stir hiding instead of welcome. But not yet. And because not yet still belongs to them, we are allowed to linger. The moment before fracture is precious exactly because it shows us what fracture damaged. It shows us the beauty of what was once natural. So let your imagination slow down enough to stay here. Let Pastor Micheal guide you not toward catastrophe, but toward the good that existed before catastrophe. See the holy as shelter. See the first pair beneath its covering. See how nothing in them is scrambling. See how even silence is friendly. If the heart has felt unsafe lately, borrow for a little while the safety of this older world. Let its gentleness become a blanket over the mind. And if prayer has become difficult for you, perhaps because you feel too restless, too distracted, too worn down to speak well, then receive this section as prayer without effort. You do not need a polished sentence at this hour. You do not need to impress heaven. You only need to remember that the deepest holiness was once a place where human beings could simply remain. They could live. They could breathe. They could be near. And that memory, even carried through fragile human language, can still quiet a person lying awake in the dark. Tonight, then, let holiness become shelter again in your imagination. Let it cease to be a pressure you must survive. Let it become the house around the story, the calm over the garden, the mercy in the air. Adam and Eve do not yet run from God. They live in the shade of His goodness. Stay with that image as long as you can. It is one of the gentlest gifts the old story offers, and it leads us naturally toward another wonder, how such a memory traveled through centuries and how Ethiopia carried it with unusual faithfulness when many others let it fall from their hands. There is something beautiful about a story surviving not by force, but by care. The memory we are following tonight did not race through history like a conquering army. It was copied, guarded, prayed over, recited, and carried. It moved through hands, through voices, through liturgical life, through monasteries that understood memory as stewardship. And when we speak of Adam and Eve through the lens of the Ethiopian Bible, We are speaking from within one of the great preservations of sacred memory in the Christian world. The Book of Jubilees, from which this unusual detail about Eden comes, survived in full, above all, in Ethiopic tradition. That matters. It means the quiet picture we are resting inside tonight was not kept alive by accident. It was kept because communities believed ancient witness was worth guarding. Long after empires shifted and languages changed, there were believers who still copied these texts, still sang their scriptures, still treated memory as a lamp that should not be allowed to go out. Try to picture that world for a moment. Not Eden now, but Ethiopia across the centuries. Mountain monasteries, stone churches, pages prepared by patient hands, ink laid down with concentration, Ge'ez words moving across the skin of parchment like a river taught to keep its banks. Outside, weather passes over the highlands. Inside, the scribe leans close to the page. He is not making noise, he is making continuity. He is refusing forgetfulness. This too is a tender part of the night story. The quiet of Eden was remembered through another kind of quiet, the quiet of preservation. Not every holy act looks dramatic. Some holy acts are repetitive in the best sense. Copy this line carefully. Protect this manuscript. Teach this child the chant. Keep the feast. Light the candle. Read the old words again. Through such acts, memory survives not as museum glass, but as living inheritance. And perhaps that says something healing to listeners who feel their own lives are too ordinary to matter. You may not be called to some loud public work. You may not be remembered by crowds. Yet the keeping of good things has always depended on people willing to honor what seems small. A parent who repeats a blessing over a child. A worshiper who returns to prayer. A reader who opens scripture again after grief. A quiet believer who refuses cynicism. These are not small things. These are how light is handed forward. Ethiopia becomes, in this sense, more than a geography. It becomes a witness to fidelity. It reminds us that spiritual memory can live far from centers of fashion or power and still remain luminous. The old canon of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept books that help us hear ancient echoes with unusual clarity, including Jubilees and Enoch. Because of that, the beginning story reaches us with textures many listeners have never heard before. The counted days, the years in Eden, the strange harmony of creatures speaking as one. Notice how beautifully this matches the tone of our night journey. We are not listening to a shallow retelling. We are listening to a memory carried with patience. And patience changes how words feel. A hurried culture usually tells stories by trimming silence away. It wants immediate usefulness. It wants a sharp moral. It wants speed. But preserved memory has room for mystery. It can say, here is an ancient detail. Do not rush to flatten it. Sit with it. Let it widen the imagination before you explain it. So imagine Pastor Micheal sitting with you in that same spirit, not as a lecturer hurrying to finish a lesson, but as a keeper of a lamp. He tells the old story carefully, because careful telling is itself part of the piece. He does not need to force the night forward. He does not need to prove the beauty of the text with tricks. The beauty is already there in the endurance. The memory itself. This story crossed generations to find your tired evening. Let that feel personal. Let it feel like a gift set quietly in your hands. Perhaps your own soul contains fragments you have nearly let disappear. Old prayers, childhood trust, a calmer way of seeing God, a truer sense of worth not tied to output. If so, let Ethiopia's keeping of sacred memory become a gentle invitation. You are allowed to keep what is holy. You are allowed to return to what nourishes. You are allowed to preserve within yourself a quieter inheritance than the world around you celebrates. There is also a kind of suspense in preservation. We know that if a memory survives so long, it may be because it holds something we still need. Why did this detail endure? Why did the image of the early garden remain worthy of copying? Perhaps because every age grows loud in its own way, and every age needs a witness that loudness is not original. Noise is not the first truth. The first truth is gift, breath, garden, nearness, and a world still capable of peace. There is a deep comfort in knowing that a text can be loved across time, loved enough to be carried over mountains, recited in worship, guarded in communities that understood that forgetting can be a spiritual wound. When Ethiopia kept these writings, it kept more than information. It kept cadence, atmosphere, and a way of remembering the beginning that still has power to quiet the present. In that sense, preservation itself becomes pastoral. It ministers to people centuries later who do not even know the names of the hands that served them. So as you listen tonight, you are not listening alone. You are receiving a memory that has already passed through prayer. That is part of its gentleness. It was not delivered by haste. It was handed down by care. And care can still be felt in the texture of the story, even now, even in the dark, even by a listener who has never stood in Ethiopia and yet is being sheltered by its faithfulness. So breathe deeply and thank God, perhaps without words, for those who kept these quiet witnesses alive. Thank Him for scribes and chanters, priests and monks, mothers and teachers, for all who refused the easy erasure of sacred memory. Their care becomes part of your rest tonight, and as their faithful keeping carries us forward, the story opens outward again, toward another image remembered in ancient tradition, the far eastern garden of righteousness, radiant and fragrant, still shimmering at the edge of the human imagination. Now, the imagination widens again. We leave the scriptorium and the monastery for a moment and step back into sacred landscape. Another ancient witness, the Book of Enoch, speaks of a garden of righteousness far to the east, a place rich with beauty, set apart, luminous, and touched by wisdom. The language is dreamlike, but not empty. It gives the soul a direction. It teaches us that Eden can be contemplated not only as lost ground behind us, but as holy geography shimmering before the mind's eye, far to the east. Even that phrase carries a hush. East is where light comes without asking permission. East is where morning first touches the edge of things. East suggests origin, dawning, unveiling. To place the garden, there is to say that the beginning still glows with first light. It belongs to the side of reality, where illumination enters gently and spreads without violence. No wonder the tired mind is soothed by such a location. It feels less like a map coordinate and more like an orientation of the soul. Picture the approach, not a hurried march, but a slow pilgrimage of attention. The land opens, air changes. The farther one travels in imagination, the less heavy the world becomes. The ordinary fields of our anxieties begin to recede. The noise of transactions, alerts, arguments, and unfinished tasks grows faint. Ahead, there is another region, and it does not vibrate with demand. It holds itself in quiet splendor. One has the sense that to enter this region properly, one must lower the voice, lower the pace, lower the burdens one carries in the chest. The garden of righteousness is not described like a market. It is not crowded. It is not frantic. It is a place in which goodness has taken root so deeply that beauty seems to rise from the ground without strain. Trees stand there as though they belong exactly where they are. Waters move without muddying themselves. Fragrance travels through the air as if blessing were tangible. The whole place suggests order without rigidity. abundance without excess, delight without intoxication. For Adam and Eve, such a setting tells us something essential. They were not introduced into bare survival. They were placed within significance. Their first home was not spiritually neutral. It was charged with meaning. Every part of it could teach them something about the giver. The garden was not only shelter and food, it was revelation in living form. To walk there was to learn through scent, texture, light, ripeness, and relation. Creation itself was their first school of peace. Many listeners, if they are honest, have forgotten that places can teach the soul. We spend so much time in environments built for efficiency that our inner lives begin to resemble hallways and waiting rooms. We pass through spaces without receiving them. But Eden refuses that kind of numbness. Its beauty is formative. The Eastern Garden teaches by being itself. It says, "This is what the world looked like when goodness had not yet been bent into competition. This is what place can mean when it is aligned with blessing." Let that eastward image also slow your breathing. The farther east the imagination moves tonight, the farther it moves from the false centers of modern urgency. You do not need to solve tomorrow from this bed. You do not need to negotiate every fear before sleep comes. The story is taking you elsewhere, to the side of reality where first light and first goodness still meet. Even hearing that possibility can quiet the mind's appetite for control. There is a further tenderness here. The garden is called righteous, not because it performs morality, but because it belongs to right relation. Everything is where it should be. Everything is receiving and giving rightly. The tree roots descend where they should. The streams move where they should. Adam and Eve stand where they should. The creatures answer one another where they should. Righteousness, then, is not cold perfection. It is fittingness. It is harmony. It is life arranged without inward war. And perhaps your own exhaustion comes partly from the experience of inward war. One desire pulling against another. One responsibility pressing against another. One fear arguing with another. The Eastern Garden offers a vision of life without that internal splitting. Even if we cannot live there fully now, the imagination can still kneel beside its streams and remember what the heart was made for. We were not made only to cope. We were made for right relation with God, with one another, with the earth, with our own bodies. So stay in the east a while. Let the image brighten quietly rather than blaze. Let the garden of righteousness remain slightly beyond full grasp. Mystery is part of its medicine. If we explained every leaf too quickly, we would lose the sacred distance that allows wonder to work. Better to stand at its margin for a few moments longer, breathing in the thought of it. Better to receive it as one receives dawn from across a field. If you have ever felt that your inner life has been flattened by practical demands, the Eastward Garden answers with width. It says there is more to reality than the narrow corridor of obligation. There are still radiant distances in God. There are still holy horizons the anxious mind has forgotten how to imagine. That is why sacred geography matters in Scripture. It stretches the soul back open. It restores dimension where strain had reduced everything to survival. So, do not be embarrassed if the thought of a far eastern garden brings a surprising ache. Longing is not weakness here. It is memory stirring. Something in you recognizes that life was meant for more than managed exhaustion. The righteous garden becomes, for a few minutes, a place where that recognition can breathe without being mocked. And as we stand there, another element rises from the text and asks for our attention. Fragrance. Trees whose scent moves through the air. Wisdom associated with fruit. The garden not merely seen, but inhaled. So in the next movement of the night, we will draw closer to those trees and let the ancient memory of scent do its slow and gentle work upon the restless mind. Some memories come through sight, others arrive through scent, and scent has a strange power over the human soul. A smell can cross years in an instant. It can reach places in us that argument never touches. So when the ancient garden is described with fragrant trees, it is as though the story itself leans closer to the body. It does not remain an idea. It becomes breathable. It becomes something that might move through the night air and settle softly around a tired listener. Imagine those trees in the garden of righteousness. Their branches do not crowd one another. Each has room to be itself. Their leaves receive light. Their trunks are steady. Their fruit ripens under no violence. And from them there travels a fragrance that does not invade, but invites. Not the synthetic sharpness of a world trying too hard to impress, but a living sweetness bound to wood, sap, flower, and sun. The garden teaches through aroma as well as through form. Perhaps that is why sacred spaces so often carry scent. Oil, incense, cedar, rain on stone, beeswax, old wood, dust, warmed by afternoon light. We remember with the whole body. The old texts understand this better than modern people sometimes do. They do not describe paradise as abstract purity. They describe it in ways the senses can approach. That makes the beginning feel less like a theory and more like a place where human beings actually belonged. The tree of wisdom, remembered in ancient tradition, stands within this atmosphere of fragrance. Even before it becomes associated with tragedy in later telling, it exists as part of a rich and meaningful order. It is not random. It belongs to the density of significance in the garden. Adam and Eve did not live in a shallow world. They lived where trees could carry meaning, where fruit could be more than nutrition, where the air itself could feel charged with instruction and blessing. Tonight, though, we are not rushing toward the moment of loss. We are attending to the beauty that makes loss matter. The fragrant trees help us do that. They remind us that the garden was lovely in specific ways. Beauty had texture there. Peace had atmosphere. Goodness had sweetness. If we only speak of Eden as a moral state, we miss how tenderly material it was. It was not less than a place. It was more than a place, but never less. Think of how a peaceful smell changes a room. The body notices before the mind names it. Shoulders come down a little. Breathing deepens. Memory opens. The old Eastern garden offers that kind of influence over the imagination. Its fragrance travels toward the listener, even now, through story. You may not be able to smell cedar or fruit or cool watered ground where you lie tonight, but language can still guide the nervous system toward calm by recalling such things faithfully and gently. Pastor Micheal would ask you now to notice your own breathing, as though you were drawing in the clean air of the garden, not forcing a deep breath, only allowing a fuller one if it comes naturally. Imagine the inhale moving through a grove where every tree is alive with gift. Imagine that nothing in the air is hostile, nothing is poisoned by contempt, nothing is sharpened by fear. Every breath tells the body, you are in a place made for life. There is also an important humility in the way fragrance works. You cannot grasp it with the hand. You cannot command it to stay. You receive it, and it passes through you. In the same way, much of God's goodness is first received rather than controlled. It comes near. It changes us. It leaves traces, but it does not belong to our mastery. Eden teaches that creaturely life begins in reception. Adam and Eve receive breath, receive place, receive fruit, receive one another, receive the very atmosphere around them. That is good news for the exhausted. So many people are tired because they have tried to control what can only be received. Sleep itself is one of those gifts. You cannot seize sleep by force. You can only make room for it. You can darken the room, loosen the muscles, quiet the voice, release the day, and let sleep come as grace. The garden's fragrance belongs to the same logic. It is not conquered, it is welcomed. There is another mercy in fragrant trees. They do not hurry the one who approaches them. You can linger beneath a branch, and nothing will accuse you of wasting time. You can stand still, and still be receiving. That is a healing lesson for the overdriven heart. Some gifts of God are richest when nothing is being achieved except attention. The sweetness of the garden enters precisely where striving loosens. And perhaps that is why this section can become almost medicinal for the tired listener. Not because scent solves every burden, but because it retrains the soul toward receptivity. Inhale, receive, exhale, release. The trees ask for nothing more complicated than that, and for a body trying to descend towards sleep, such simplicity is its own form of kindness. And if one tree stays with you after this section ends, let that be enough. The night does not ask you to carry the whole forest. One branch, one sweetness, one remembered stillness can be enough to guide the mind away from its crowded rooms and toward gentler sleep. So let the fragrant trees do quiet work inside your imagination. Let them sweeten the story. Let them remind you that the world was once rich without being overstimulating, full without becoming loud. And because our night journey is being carried through Ethiopian memory and landscape, the fragrance of the eastern garden now begins to mingle with another atmosphere. Stone retaining the last warmth of day, breath visible in the cooling highland dusk, and the steady hush of a land where sacred memory has long been sung. That is where the next section leads us. Now we let the Eastern Garden and the Ethiopian highlands touch each other in the imagination, not because they are identical, but because the human heart often understands ancient stories better when it is given a landscape in which to rest them. So see the highlands at dusk, see stone darkening slowly under evening, see terraces and paths where footsteps have learned reverence. See the final light thinning over the ridges. The world is not empty, it is quietly held. Stone is a fitting companion for this hour of the story. Earlier sections gave us earth, fruit, creatures, and trees. Now stone appears, not as hardness that rejects life, but as steadiness that outlasts hurry. Stone remembers pressure without panic. It bears weight without protest. It keeps the warmth of the sun a little longer into evening. In places of prayer, stone also gathers devotion. It holds the imprint of generations who have stood, knelt, sung, wept, and waited within its shelter. Imagine Adam and Eve through that lens of steadiness. Their life before rupture has a kind of stone-like calm. Not coldness, not immobility, stability. Their days are not flimsy. Their identities are not wobbling under public opinion. Their relation to God is not being reinvented every hour. There is something founded beneath them. The garden is alive, but it is not unstable. It has roots, limits, pathways, and ordered beauty. In that sense, the highland stone helps us feel the weight-bearing peace of Eden. Breath belongs here too. Evening in the highlands invites attention to breath. Air cools, voices soften. The body begins to notice its own rhythm again. Breath was the beginning of Adam's life, and tonight breath becomes the bridge between the story and the listener. You may be lying in a room far from Ethiopia, far from ancient texts, far from stone churches and eastern gardens, yet your breath still joins you to the first human truth. Life is received one breath at a time. Pastor Micheal might ask you now not to measure your breathing. only to accompany it. Feel the inhale arrive. Feel the exhale loosen the body's grip. On the day, let the ribs move without force. Let the breath be less like a task and more like a visitor that knows the way. In the beginning, Adam did not earn breath. He awakened into it. And perhaps tonight, you can let your own breathing become less achievement and more welcome. The highland dusk adds another mercy. It lowers the demands of sight. Daylight, for all its gifts, can make the world too defined when the mind is already tired. Night softens edges. Dusk permits a kinder blur. The stone path is still there, but it does not insist on being analyzed. The ridge is still there, but it recedes into gentleness. The body often follows what the eyes are given. So when the world grows softer to look at, the mind can sometimes grow softer to inhabit. This is one reason sacred evenings matter. They teach transition. They show us how to move from labor to stillness without violence. The highlands at dusk do not snap from brightness to blackness. They descend. They ease. They gather the day and fold it inward. The soul needs that same gradualness. Many restless people struggle because they try to leap into sleep from full speed. But the story tonight is offering descent, not collision. It is leading you down by gentle turns. There is a suspended feeling in dusk that suits this part of Adam and Eve's story. They still stand before the fracture, yet the listener knows twilight can also suggest an approaching change. That double feeling gives the section its quiet suspense. Beauty remains, but it remains on the edge of a chapter we know will not last forever. This makes the present moment more precious, not less. Temporary peace, when noticed, becomes radiant. So let the stone beneath your imagination remain warm from the fading sun. Let the breath inside your chest become less burdened. Let the highland air clear away the stale pressure of the day. If your thoughts have been circling like trapped birds, give them a ridge to settle on. Give them the dignity of evening. Give them the mercy of something older and steadier than urgency. The highlands at dusk also teach reverence without noise. No banner is lifted over the ridges. No loud command announces that the holy hour has begun. Instead, the land itself seems to bow. Shadows lengthen. Air cools. Color deepens. It is as though creation knows how to keep evening prayer without words. When you imagine Eden through that atmosphere, the garden feels less like fantasy and more like a place where all things had learned the right proportion of hush. Let that proportion reach your own body now. The day does not have to be denied, only set down. The night does not have to solve you, only receive you. Stone, breath, and dusk together whisper a truth the restless heart often resists. Not everything precious happens in acceleration. Some of the most faithful moments in a life are the slow descents, the ones that teach us how to let ourselves be kept. The stone paths of the imagination do not hurry the traveler. They accept slow footsteps. They welcome pauses. That too is part of their wisdom. A soul can arrive more honestly by walking gently than by racing into collapse. Even the fading warmth in stone has its lesson. What receives light well can release it slowly. Let your own spirit do the same tonight. Stay with that image a little longer. A path of stone receiving the last tenderness of light. Nothing on the path is frantic. Nothing tries to arrive before its time. Evening gives each surface permission to become quieter, and the soul can learn from that permission. And while the stone holds the warmth of day, another gentler detail begins to glow in the dark. Candlelight, beeswax, and cedar smoke. The night's atmosphere deepens. The story comes closer. The senses quiet further. So we move now from the open dusk toward a more intimate shelter, where light flickers low and the air itself seems to pray. There are kinds of light meant for work and kinds of light meant for rest. Noon clarifies, lamplight consoles. In the world of this script, As the highland dusk settles, beeswax candles begin to glow against darkening stone, and cedar smoke threads slowly through the air. Nothing flashes, nothing competes. The room of the imagination becomes small enough to feel safe and large enough to breathe in. Beeswax light is gentle light. It does not interrogate the face. It softens corners. It turns walls into quiet companions. It gives enough brightness to see by, but not enough to keep the mind marching forward in sharp lines. That is why it belongs so well to a story meant to carry a listener toward sleep. In such light, the old texts feel less like information and more like presence. They are not demanding to be mastered. They are simply asking to be received. Cedar smoke adds another layer of calm. It rises slowly. It curls rather than bursts. Its fragrance carries wood, distance, memory, and prayer. One can imagine it in a stone-hewn place of worship, or drifting through a sheltered threshold as evening prayer fades. One can also imagine it meeting the remembered fragrance of Eden's trees. The two atmospheres do not clash. They answer each other. Garden sweetness and temple steadiness, fruitfulness and devotion, the living world and the worshiping world meeting in one quiet breath. In that meeting, Adam and Eve become easier to picture, not as distant icons but as beings who belonged within sensory peace. Their world before the fall was not flat. It had smell, warmth, shade, movement, and texture. Their evenings were not dominated by analysis. Their bodies were not haunted by replay and projection. They could inhabit a place. They could stand in light without performing for it. They could breathe air that was not charged with hidden conflict. Perhaps this is why so many tired people love small rituals at night, even when they have no words for why. A lamp switched on, a blanket folded down, tea cooling in the cup, curtains drawn. The body recognizes ceremony as kindness. It says, "We are leaving the public world now. We are crossing into shelter." The beeswax and cedar in tonight's telling serve a similar purpose. They are not decoration. They are thresholds. They teach the mind that it may stop scanning and begin settling. Pastor Micheal would want to place no strain even upon your listening. You do not need to follow every image with equal attention. If one candle remains in the mind, keep that candle. If one thread of smoke remains, keep that thread. If the phrase cedar smoke and beeswax light becomes a small resting place inside you, let it do so. Sleep often comes not by completing every thought, but by giving the heart a few faithful images gentle enough to carry into dreaming. Let us say something important here for the one whose nights have become combative. You are not weak because you need atmosphere. Human beings are not minds floating above matter. We are embodied creatures. Light affects us. Scent affects us. Temperature affects us. Sound affects us. The garden story honors that embodied truth. It does not speak as though holiness belongs only to abstract ideas. It speaks of breath, fruit, trees, ground, timing, and companionship. So allow your own body to matter in this hour. That is not less spiritual. It is more honest. The cedar smoke also reminds us of the slow upward movement of prayer. Not every prayer is spoken. Some prayers are simply a yielding, a loosening, a consent to be carried by God when one no longer has strength to formulate anything noble. If your prayers tonight are little more than a tired exhale, let that be enough. Let it rise like cedar smoke through the dimness. Let God receive the shape of your need without your having to improve it. Even memory behaves differently in low light. Harsh details lose their edge. The heart stops cross-examining itself with the same intensity. Beeswax light does not erase truth, but it changes how truth is carried. It becomes gentler to behold. Cedar smoke works similarly. It moves through space as a reminder that not every influence in life must be abrupt in order to be real. Some things heal by drifting slowly through the room until the body realizes it is already relaxed. If you need a night ritual after this recording ends, perhaps keep it simple and kind. Dimmer light, a slower voice, a room that signals safety instead of alertness. The old story honors those little thresholds. It understands that the body often enters peace by way of atmosphere, long before the mind can explain why. That understanding is part of the tenderness of Scripture when it is told with patience. Perhaps this is why candlelight has comforted generations. It honors human scale. It says the room need not be conquered. It only needs to be inhabited peacefully. And for a weary listener, that is a profound relief. Small sacred atmospheres have carried many people through heavy seasons. Never underestimate what a quiet room can teach the heart about safety. When light grows gentle enough, the body stops feeling watched. That alone can be a ministry to the overburdened heart. Peace sometimes begins with the simple realization that no harsh gaze is demanding more from you in this hour. Gentle light teaches the soul that peace can be real without spectacle. Quiet can be trustworthy. And as the candle lowers and the fragrance deepens, another truth begins to gather around the whole story. The quiet we are entering is older than our frantic age, older than our habits of self-advertisement, older than our restless technologies, older than our endless proving. So in the next section, we will sit inside that thought and let it loosen the modern tension that says only hurry is real. Most people living now have spent years inside a culture that distrusts quiet. If nothing is happening outwardly, we assume nothing important is happening at all. If a day is not visibly productive, we begin to treat it as suspect. If a person is not constantly signaling effort, success, or relevance, the world easily overlooks them. Hurry has become not only a habit, but a morality. It pretends to be proof of significance. That is why the old story of Adam and Eve before the world grew loud feels almost radical. It presents a form of life untouched by performance frenzy. Their value is not established by visible hustle. Their existence does not begin under the demand to outpace time. They are created, placed, taught, given work that fits their nature, and allowed to dwell. There is motion in Eden, certainly, but not frenzy. There is purpose, but not panic. There is order, but not obsession. The quiet of Eden is older than our hurry, because hurry is not original. Urgency has its place in a fallen world where danger exists and responsibilities collide. But it is not the deepest truth about being human. The deeper truth is reception. Breath received, life received, place received, love received. Even labor, before it became burdened, was received as vocation within blessing. To hear this is to realize that much of what exhausts us feels normal only because we have forgotten older measures of life. Take a moment and notice how often the modern world uses noise to simulate meaning. Alerts, opinion, constant reaction, endless updates, quick emotional escalation. It creates the sensation that if you step back, you will lose your grasp on reality. But ancient quiet says the opposite. Step back, and reality may become more visible. Lower the volume, and truth may sound clearer. Slow your body, and the soul may finally catch up. This section is not asking you to despise activity. Adam and Eve were not inert. They tended, named, walked, received, responded. The point is not emptiness. The point is unfractured rhythm. Their actions belong to a life not yet at war with itself. That is what makes the garden restful even when things are being done. Peace is not the absence of all movement. Peace is movement that does not tear the person apart. Perhaps that is what you are hungry for tonight. Not escape from all responsibility forever, but 1 hour in which your inner world is not being ripped in opposite directions. 1 hour in which your breathing is not hostage to unfinished tasks. 1 hour in which you can believe that your humanity is larger than your schedule. The old Ethiopian memory of the beginning quietly insists that such a humanity once existed in full sunlight. It was not imaginary. It was the intended shape of life. Pastor Micheal would ask you to let that truth move through you without argument. You do not need to solve the tension between Eden and the present. You do not need to build a system out of it. You only need to let the older quiet stand beside your current hurry long enough for comparison. Sometimes healing begins there, not with immediate change, but with contrast. You suddenly realize how loud you have been living. You realize how rarely your heart has been addressed gently. There is suspense even in this comparison, because the story of Eden does not merely soothe, it also exposes. It reveals how unnatural so much of our normal has become. It shows us that constant strain is not a badge of glory. It is a sign that something has gone wrong in the human field. Yet even this exposure is kind. It is not meant to shame the exhausted. It is meant to tell them they are not imagining the damage. The noise really is too much. The hurry really is heavy. So if your soul has been aching under that heaviness, receive this section as permission to believe in an older quiet. A quiet older than inboxes, older than competition, older than self-branding, older than the machinery of relentless comparison. A quiet carried in scripture, echoed in prayer, remembered in the garden before the fracture. It is older than our hurry because it comes from God, and what comes from God is never anxious to prove itself. The quieter life is not always the easier life, but it is often the truer one. Hurry can make us feel important while quietly thinning our attention, our prayer, our delight, and our capacity to love. The older quiet of Eden does the opposite. It gathers the person back together. It restores proportion. It teaches that time is not only something to race against, but something within which goodness can ripen. So if you feel grief at how hurried your life has become, let that grief be clean and honest. It may be the beginning of wisdom. To notice that noise has been stealing from you is already to turn slightly toward freedom. Eden's calm is not mocking you from a distance. It is inviting you to remember that your deepest design was never frantic. Even now, under all the noise of modern life, that older quiet has not vanished entirely. It appears in prayer, in honest stillness, in unforced kindness. In the hour when the soul stops advertising itself, you are allowed to seek that hour again. The soul was not designed to live forever at emergency speed. Remembering that is not laziness, it is honesty. You do not betray your calling by slowing down enough to remember you are human. Often that remembering is what saves calling from becoming cruelty. Let that sentence settle low in you. What comes from God is never anxious to prove itself. Not the breath given to Adam, not the companionship given in Eve, not the garden prepared in wisdom, not the evening light on the hills, not the mercy that now meets you in the dark. And because so many listeners suffer beneath the fear that rest makes them lesser, the next section will speak directly to that wound. There are people who can stop working and feel only relief. And then there are people for whom rest quickly awakens another feeling. Fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of looking lazy. Fear of becoming smaller in the eyes of others, or perhaps smaller in their own. If you know that feeling, this section is for you. Somewhere along the way, many souls were taught that visibility is safety. As long as you are useful, you matter. As long as you are producing, you belong. As long as you are active, no one can accuse you of failing. The result is a life built on subtle self-defense. You keep moving not only because there is work to do, but because stillness begins to feel dangerous. In stillness, unhealed voices grow louder. In stillness, old accusations return. In stillness, you meet yourself without the protection of momentum. That is why the garden story is such a tender counterword. Adam and Eve are not introduced through achievement. They are beloved before accomplishment. They are spoken to before they have proven themselves. They are placed in goodness before they have built a record. The first human truth is not, "Show me what you can do." The first human truth is, "Receive what I have made and know that you are mine." This matters deeply for the person who fears becoming small in rest, because rest does not make Adam less human. Rest reveals the kind of human he already is: dependent, breathed into, held by gift. Eve too is not diminished by peaceful existence. Her worth is not measured by constant motion. Her arrival in the story is itself a sign that companionship and delight belong to the structure of life. She is not an accessory to productivity. She is part of the fullness of blessing. Perhaps your exhaustion has become tangled with shame. Perhaps you hear yourself apologize for being tired. Perhaps you have begun to speak of your body as though it were a failed machine rather than a creature with limits. If so, listen gently now. Tiredness is not always guilt. Need is not failure. The inability to remain permanently available is not moral weakness. You were not made to become pure utility. Eden tells the truth more softly than the world does, but also more truly. Imagine for a moment that you were allowed to become less visible tonight without losing value. Imagine if the unanswered message could remain unanswered until morning and your worth would not drain away with it. Imagine if sleep did not threaten your significance. Imagine if quiet did not reduce you, but return you. The first pair in the garden suggest exactly that. In peaceful rhythm, they are not erased. They are more fully themselves. Pastor Micheal would want to speak kindly, but plainly here. Some wounds cannot be solved by a single bedtime meditation. Some fears come from deep histories of criticism, instability, or conditional love. Yet even deep wounds need gentle truth repeated to them. So hear this truth again, in a form the tired heart can bear. You do not become smaller in the eyes of God when you lie down. You do not become less worthy because your strength has limits. You do not lose your place in mercy when you stop performing. The old image of Eden can help you practice believing this. See Adam at rest without disgrace. See Eve in peace without apology. See them existing under blessing before the long human history of proving begins. Let that image speak back to every false voice that says only the overextended life is honorable. There is honor in receiving creaturely limits. There is wisdom in honoring the body's need. There is humility in ceasing when one cannot go further. There is also suspense here, because part of what will be lost later in the story is precisely this unashamed restfulness. After fear enters, the human creature will hide, strive, and harden in new ways. But by showing us what came before, the text gives us something to grieve and something to desire. We grieve the loss of ease, we desire its restoration. Even that desire can become holy when it drives us not into despair, but into trust. Sometimes the fear of becoming small in rest is really the fear of being unloved when no one is impressed. That is a painful fear, and many people carry it more secretly than they admit. But the beginning story speaks against it with unusual tenderness. God's first relation to the human creature is not admiration for performance, it is delight in existence. That means your most basic worth does not flicker on and off according to your output. Take that slowly. Let it descend beneath the habits of self-critique. You are not only valuable when you are useful to everyone around you. You are not only visible when you are exhausted. You may rest without erasing yourself. You may sleep without becoming less real. In a loud age, that truth is almost revolutionary, and perhaps tonight it is exactly the medicine your heart needed. Rest does not reduce the soul to nothing. Often it reveals the soul beneath the masks. What if becoming quieter tonight is not becoming smaller, but becoming truer? Let that possibility remain beside you as the night deepens. You remain held when you are quiet. You remain seen when you are still. The truest self is often the self that emerges when the performance ends. Let night make room for that quieter self without fear. So if tonight you are afraid that letting go will make you vanish, let Eden lend you another imagination. Let rest be not disappearance, but return. Return to creatureliness. Return to breath. Return to the truth that you are loved by a God who knew you before you did anything impressive. The next section will carry that truth even more directly into the heart of the script, because the garden itself says it with extraordinary force. You do not need to prove yourself there. The world outside Eden teaches endless audition. Demonstrate your value, establish your advantage, curate your image, defend your place. But inside the garden, none of that logic is native. Adam does not wake up wondering how to justify his existence. Eve does not enter the story with a resume in her hand. They are there because they have been given to be there. Their life begins in belonging, not in competition for belonging. That is one of the quietest and strongest comforts in the whole beginning narrative. The garden is prepared before they arrive. Its fruit does not appear as a prize for exceptional performance. The paths are not unlocked only after sufficient merit. The very structure of Eden says, gift before proof, home before achievement, welcome before display. To listeners raised on earned acceptance, such a pattern can feel almost unbelievable. And yet, this is why the story is restful. A person can relax in a place where existence is not a contest. Consider how exhausting it is to move through spaces where every interaction carries a hidden score. Who noticed me? Did I say enough? Was I useful enough? Did I disappoint someone? Am I falling behind? The body never fully settles under those questions. Eden, by contrast, is a world where the body can inhabit itself without constant self-assessment. No wonder it glows in memory. It is important here to be honest. Adam and Eve do receive a calling. They are not empty figures floating in leisure. They keep the garden. They receive instruction. They live within order. But vocation is not the same as proving. Calling is not audition. The work of Eden belongs to a relationship already given. They labor from acceptance, not for acceptance. That difference changes everything. Work can remain peaceful only when it is not carrying the unbearable weight of identity. Perhaps that is a word some listener desperately needs tonight. Your work cannot carry your whole identity. It was never meant to. If you ask career, ministry, family role, public usefulness, or private efficiency to tell you finally who you are, the burden will crush you. But if identity is first received from the God who breathes life and gives place, then work can become lighter. Important, yes. Faithful, yes. But not ultimate. The garden also teaches this through companionship. Adam is not left to prove himself in isolation. Eve's presence says that fullness includes relation. Human beings are not designed to justify themselves alone in a field of spectators. They are designed for communion, mutuality, and shared life under God. Even the creaturely world around them once answered in harmony. Everything in Eden resists the lonely theater of self-promotion. Pastor Micheal might ask you now to imagine setting down the invisible clipboard by which you have measured yourself all week. Set down the list of your deficiencies, Set down the rehearsed explanations. Set down the anxiety of whether you are enough for every demand that has looked your way. In the garden, none of these papers are needed. No one is asking Adam to become more than breathed dust made alive by grace. No one is asking Eve to become more than the beloved companion she is given to be. There is quiet suspense again, because the listener knows how deeply the proving instinct will later enter human history. Once fear arrives, hiding and self-justification rush in close behind. But because we are still lingering in the before, we can see more clearly what was lost. Not merely innocence in the abstract, but the ease of living unperformed before God. That is a profound loss, and recognizing it helps many modern listeners understand the ache inside their own striving. If you have been living as though every day were a verdict, let this section interrupt that harshness. The garden does not erase responsibility. It erases performance panic. It does not abolish meaningful action. It abolishes the lie that love must be earned from scratch every morning. There is extraordinary rest in that distinction. Enough rest, perhaps, for tired thoughts to loosen their grip and allow the night to come deeper. There is extraordinary relief in being somewhere that does not constantly ask for an explanation of your existence. The garden offers that relief in sacred form. Adam and Eve are not negotiating belonging from opposite sides of a table. They simply belong. Their presence is welcomed. Their tasks arise within welcome. For many listeners, even imagining that kind of life loosens a knot they did not realize they were carrying. If tomorrow is full of demands, let this still be true tonight. Before all those demands speak, you are a creature of God, not a product on trial. That does not erase responsibility, but it sets responsibility inside mercy, and responsibility carried inside mercy becomes far less crushing than responsibility carried inside fear. Belonging before proof is difficult for many people to trust, yet the garden places that trust at the center of human beginnings. To remember this is to breathe differently. It is to let mercy speak first. Mercy is a better foundation for duty than fear will ever be. Let that truth settle before sleep. Home is one of the most healing words in any language. Eden gives that word to the human story before it gives any pressure. Rest inside that order for a moment. Belovedness is the first ground under their feet. Belonging comes before display. So hear the sentence plainly before we move on. You do not need to prove yourself in the garden. Let it become slower each time it passes through the heart. You do not need to prove yourself in the garden. You do not need to prove yourself in the presence of the one who formed you. You do not need to prove yourself before sleep. The lamp of night is lowering now, and the script itself begins to move into deeper drift. There is a moment each evening when the world seems to lean away from its own sharpness. The last tasks lose their claim. Windows become mirrors. Distant sounds blur into atmosphere. The room stops behaving like a place of transaction and becomes, if we let it, a place of surrender. That is the hour this section inhabits. The night lowers its lamp, and everything in the story grows softer around the edges. Imagine that lamp in an old stone place, hanging low, its light pooled rather than thrown. It does not illuminate the whole world. It only blesses the space immediately around it. That is enough. We do not need everything visible now. We do not need every future path lit. We do not need every unanswered question solved before sleep. The lowered lamp gives permission for partial seeing, and partial seeing can be merciful. Adam and Eve, in our night imagination, stand not in fear, but in evening calm. The garden is quiet around them. Leaves hold their dark green peace. The paths keep the memory of daylight. Creaturely life settles. Even speech, once shared among all living things in ancient memory, seems to have become softer with the hour. There is no argument in the branches. no alarm in the grass, no fracture in the air. The whole world seems to understand the grammar of evening. For many people, night has become difficult because it amplifies what day has postponed. Thoughts return, regrets line up, plans insist on being completed inwardly. The lowered lamp of this section is meant to do the opposite. It narrows attention kindly. It says, "Do not carry the whole world into this hour. Carry only what can be entrusted. Carry only what can be released. Carry only what can be held by God when your own hands finally unclench." Pastor Micheal would invite you now to imagine setting one burden at a time beneath that lowered lamp. Not solving it, setting it down. The conversation you cannot finish tonight. The money concern you cannot untangle tonight. The grief you cannot heal tonight. The pressure to become better before morning. Place each burden in the circle of light and then step back from it. Let the lamp hold what you cannot. This is also where the script turns more deeply towards sleep. Story remains, but it grows more spacious. The sentences widen. The pauses lengthen. The body is no longer being led through explanations so much as through atmosphere. We are moving from meaning grasped by the mind to mercy felt by the whole person. Sometimes that shift is what finally allows drowsiness to arrive. The mind stops trying to win and begins to rest inside what is given. There is still suspense, but now it is the soft suspense of descent. How much deeper can the room become? How much quieter can the breath become? How gently can the heart be carried without losing consciousness all at once? Night answers these questions slowly. It lowers its lamp until the eyes no longer need to follow everything. It lets shadows become kind. It teaches that darkness need not always mean danger. In God's world, darkness also means concealment, rest, womb-like keeping, and the mercy of not having to perform visibility. If you have feared the dark, or feared what comes when thought is less supervised, let this image reintroduce the night as companion. Not every darkness is abandonment. Some darkness is cover. Some darkness is a curtain drawn against the excessive glare of the day. Some darkness is God dimming the room so that your weary system can remember how to cease. A lowered lamp also protects mystery. It reminds us that we are not required to inspect every corner of our life before resting. Some things can remain dim for a few hours and do no harm. In fact, the soul often heals better when it is not overexposed. The nighttime mercy of partial light lets the heart stop forcing clarity where gentleness would be wiser. So if there is something in your life you cannot yet understand, let it sit peacefully at the edge of the room. It does not need to move closer tonight. The lamp is low on purpose. God is not withholding goodness by dimming the hour. He may be giving you exactly the amount of light your tired spirit can bear. That too is kindness. That too is care. That too can lead a person softly towards sleep. There is wisdom in accepting the circle of light you have and not demanding a floodlight for the entire future. The lowered lamp teaches trust in stages, trust in enoughness, trust in the grace of what is revealed and what is kindly postponed until morning. The lowered lamp says enough for now, enough light, enough mercy, enough understanding for this hour. A kind darkness can gather a person back into proportion. It can say, very softly, that not everything must be carried at full brightness all the time. Night does not owe us total explanation before it offers rest. Let the dimmer hour protect you from the pressure to understand everything at once. Rest can begin inside partial light. The lamp lowers, then, over Eden, over Ethiopia, over your own room. It lowers over stone and cedar smoke, over garden memory and manuscript faithfulness, over the body in bed and the first pair in their untroubled world. It lowers over every listener, still holding themselves too tightly. And as it lowers, the next movement comes naturally. The mind itself may begin to unknot. There are nights when the body is willing to sleep, but the mind is still tying ropes. One thought loops through another. One memory hooks itself to another. Questions do not arrive singly. They arrive in clusters, each tugging at a different place in the chest. A knotted mind can make even a safe room feel restless. That is why this part of the script turns directly toward the interior tangle. Notice that a knot is not evil. It is simply something pulled too tight. That matters. Many weary people become angry at themselves for not calming down faster, as though tension were rebellion rather than strain. But knots usually form because pressure has been applied again and again. The answer is not violence toward the knot. It is patient loosening. Pull too hard and the fibers tighten. Work gently, and space begins to return. The garden before the world grew loud offers an image of the unknotted mind. Adam and Eve are not yet split within themselves. They are attentive without being hypervigilant. They are aware without rehearsing disaster. Their consciousness belongs to a world where relation is still whole. That does not make them less intelligent. It makes them less burdened. The mind is healthiest not when it controls everything, but when it no longer has to defend against everything. So tonight, dear friends, let the old story become a method of loosening. You do not need to wrench your thoughts into silence. You only need to follow gentler things. Follow the path of evening through the garden. Follow the scent of the trees. Follow the warmth leaving the stone. Follow the breath entering and leaving your own body. Follow Pastor Micheal's voice only as long as it helps, and when it begins to fade into background, let it fade. The point is not to cling. The point is to release. Sometimes a mind knots around regret. If that is true tonight, let Eden remind you that your deepest identity was never meant to be built from your worst replay. Sometimes the mind knots around fear of the future. If that is true tonight, let the Eastern Garden remind you there are realities beyond your forecast. Sometimes the mind knots around self-judgment. If that is true tonight, let the first pair standing unashamed before God tell you that shame is not the oldest language spoken over human life. There is also wisdom in narrowing the field. A knotted mind tries to hold too much at once, so give it less to hold. One breath, one image, one line, perhaps this one. I do not have to untie everything tonight. Or this one. God is near even when my thoughts are tangled. Or this one. The night lowers its lamp, and I may lower my guard. You need only one line if one line is enough. The body often follows the mind's loosening. The jaw eases, the brow softens, fingers uncurl against the blanket, the throat releases, thoughts stop hitting one another so sharply, a gap appears, then another. Into those gaps, sleep sometimes enters quietly, almost unnoticed. This is why gentleness matters. Rest rarely comes through inner domination. It comes through permission, through room, through the slow unmaking of pressure. Pastor Micheal would not rush you here. Some knots untie in a few breaths. Others loosen one thread at a time. Either is fine. The garden is patient, the night is patient, God is patient. You are not being graded on how beautifully you relax. You are only being invited into a quieter field of attention than the one your worries have built. There is a final tenderness to remember. Even if the mind does not fully empty, it can still soften enough for sleep. We do not need perfection to rest. We need mercy. We need enough gentleness that the body believes it is allowed to let go. So let the knot become less important than the hands of God around the whole tangled thing. He knows how to hold complexity without crushing it. The mind also unknots through trust in unfinishedness. Not every loose end must be tied before dawn. Not every emotional thread must be traced to its origin tonight. Sometimes wisdom is simply knowing when to stop touching the knot. Set it in God's hands. Let Him hold the complexity while you rest in your finitude. You do not have to be large enough to govern every layer of your own soul before morning comes. This is where grace becomes practical. Grace is not only forgiveness for failure, it is also permission to be incomplete and still be loved. When the mind begins to learn that, it relaxes. It no longer treats wakefulness as a courtroom in which every thought must defend itself. It becomes a field where God may walk quietly while the heart lies down. Sometimes the loosening begins the moment you stop insisting that your mind behave perfectly. Compassion is often the first untangling. Speak inwardly with the tone you would use for someone frightened and dear to you, and feel what changes. Unfinished thoughts can wait beside the bed without climbing back into your chest. Leave them there and rest. Sometimes peace begins when you stop treating every thought as urgent mail. Some things can remain unopened until daylight, without any loss of love. What is not solved can still be surrendered. God can hold the unfinished portions of your life while you sleep. And as the mind loosens, the focus of the story drops deeper still into the simplest house we inhabit tonight, the house of breath, rib, chest, and heart. That is where the next section waits, quiet and low, ready to help the whole body settle under grace. At last we come to the most intimate chamber of the night, your own breathing body. Not the world out there, not the centuries of transmission, not even the far eastern garden, beautiful as it is. Now the story bows low and comes to the place where you are actually lying, where breath enters and leaves, where ribs rise and fall, where wakefulness and sleep meet in the soft doorway of the chest. The body is often the last part of us to believe the danger is past. The mind may agree to rest, but the body remembers old alarms. It remembers pressure, sudden messages, loud rooms, grief, effort, embarrassment, scarcity, and long seasons of proving. So this section does not command the body to calm down. It accompanies the body until calm feels plausible. The house of your breath grows quiet by hospitality, not by force. Adam's first moment was a breathing moment. He became a living soul under the gift of breath. That ancient beginning gives dignity to your own breathing now. Each inhale is creaturely, humble, and holy in its own ordinary way. Each exhale is a small release back into God's keeping. You do not need to make your breathing profound. It already is. The fact that breath continues while you rest is one more sign that life is sustained by mercy more than by management. Imagine then your chest as a small dwelling under the night. With every breath, a lamp glows and dims within it. The heart keeps its patient rhythm. The lungs receive what they need. The ribs widen and return. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, and yet this hidden work is astonishing. You are being kept alive while lying still. Existence itself continues to be given. The body does not ask you to oversee every process. It asks only that you let it belong to the night. Pastor Micheal would ask you now to notice any place in the body still holding unnecessary duty, the forehead trying to think one last thought, the tongue pressing upward, the shoulders carrying the memory of the day, the stomach bracing, the hands curled as though still working. One by one, let those places learn from the breath. Breathing does not clench to keep happening. It arrives, departs, and returns. Let the body imitate that trust. This is where many listeners discover that Scripture can be received somatically, not only mentally. The story of Eden has been speaking to your imagination, yes, but it has also been speaking to your body through image and pace. Garden, dusk, cedar, lamp, east, fruit, stone, breath. These are not merely concepts. They are places for the nervous system to rest its weight. They are soft landings. They are bodily prayers disguised as story. There is no need now to strive for deep insight. Insight has already done its work. The greater mercy in this section is quiet embodiment. Feel the mattress beneath you. Feel the blanket or sheet. Feel the small coolness or warmth of the room. Feel the exhale take more of the day away from you than you realized it could. The house of your breath does not need to host the whole world tonight. It only needs to shelter your life until morning. There is still a trace of suspense, but it is almost completely dissolved into tenderness now. The suspense is only this: how softly can you be held before sleep takes you? How completely can the body be trusted to descend? How near can God's mercy come without speech? The answer, perhaps, is nearer than you feared. Near enough to ride the breath itself. Near enough to dwell in the pauses between sentences. Near enough to feel like stillness rather than interruption. So let the house of your breath grow quiet. Let each inhale become more anonymous, less supervised, more natural. Let each exhale carry away one more thread of effort. If sleep comes before the story ends, that is not failure. That is the story succeeding. It means the old garden has done its work. It has led you back, however briefly, to a world where being kept mattered more than staying alert. Listen for a moment to how humble breathing is. It never boasts. It never demands applause. It simply serves life faithfully in secret. There is wisdom in that hiddenness. Much of what keeps us alive is quiet. Heartbeat, breath, cellular repair, the slow work of the night inside the body. Rest aligns us again with those hidden fidelities. It reminds us that not all important work is visible. So if you have been measuring your life only by what can be displayed, let the breath correct you gently. The most essential things may be happening below the surface. The night knows this. The body knows this. God certainly knows this. You are being sustained in places no audience will ever see. And that hidden sustaining is one more reason you can release the pressure to stay on guard. You do not have to supervise the night. The body knows many things without your command. Let that hidden wisdom comfort you. Let it remind you that being carried is not the same as losing control. Sometimes it is the truest form of safety. Hidden faithfulness is still faithfulness. The breath proves it with every quiet return. Trust the quiet labor within you. Breath, pulse, and rest are old servants of mercy, and they know how to keep watch while you sleep. Let hidden mercy do its hidden work. You're safe to be a creature tonight. And if you are still awake for the final section, then come with me one last time to the center of the night's message. Not to fear, not to proving, not to noise, but to the oldest comfort in this entire beginning. Before the world grew loud, God was near. We have come to the closing edge of tonight's journey, and the deepest truth has been waiting here from the beginning. Before the world grew loud, God was near. Before the serpent's distortion, before shame tightened the body, before blame fractured speech, before exile made the ground feel strange, God was near. Near in breath, near in garden, near in companionship, near in the ordered goodness of a world not yet taught to fear itself. That is the final comfort I want to leave with you, dear friends. The first and deepest movement of reality is not abandonment, it is nearness. Human life did not begin in distance from God, but in the warmth of His presence. The first pair were not cast into a cold universe and told to invent hope for themselves. They were formed, welcomed, placed, and known. Even after all history's sorrow, that beginning still tells the truth about the heart of God. This matters because many tired souls secretly imagine God as far away unless called by crisis. They know how to seek Him in emergency, but not in stillness. They know how to cry out in fear, but not how to rest in nearness. Yet Eden says nearness precedes crisis. Nearness is older than panic. Nearness is older than guilt. Nearness is older than the loudness that now fills so much of human life. And what is older in God is often what is truest. So, picture the whole story one final time. Adam, awakened by breath. Eve, arriving in companionship. The garden prepared. The years of peace. Creatures in harmony. The eastern radiance. Trees carrying fragrance through the air. Ethiopian memory guarding the witness through centuries. Highland dusk settling over stone. Beeswax light glowing low. Cedar smoke rising. The night lowering its lamp. Your own body listening. All of it gathers into one sentence. God was near. If you have felt alone lately, do not force yourself to feel otherwise all at once. Simply let the sentence stand beside your loneliness for a while. God was near. If you have felt that your worth depends on never stopping, let this sentence stand beside your striving. God was near before performance. If fear has made you suspicious of rest, let the sentence stand beside your unrest. God was near before the world learned to be loud. Pastor Micheal would offer you now not a lecture, but a blessing. May the God who breathed life into Adam and gave companionship to Eve quiet your spirit tonight. May the God who once walked with human beings in untroubled nearness make His peace felt in the hidden rooms of your heart. May every false demand that says you must prove yourself before sleeping lose its voice. May your mind become less crowded, your body less guarded, your breathing more free. May the memory of the garden do for you what a gentle hand does for a frightened child. May it reassure without forcing. May it steady without gripping. May it remind you that peace is not imaginary just because it feels distant. The world grew loud, yes, but loudness is not the only music creation has known. Beneath it there remains an older cadence, and tonight you have listened for it. May your room become kinder as you drift. May the corners soften. May the mattress feel more supportive. May the blanket grow warmer or cooler exactly as you need. May unfinished thoughts lose their urgency. May tomorrow wait its turn. May grief be held, not solved. May pressure loosen. May sleep come as gift, not as conquest. And if sleep delays a little longer, may that not trouble you. Rest is already happening in hidden ways. Your breath is slower. Your mind has traveled elsewhere. Your heart has heard gentler things. The old beginning has offered you shelter. Stay there as long as you need. The garden will not rush you out. The lamp is still low. The night is still merciful. God is still near. So now, dear friends, I leave you with the quietest part of the story. Before noise, there was breath. Before hiding, there was welcome. Before strain, there was gift. Before the world grew loud, God was near. And may that nearness keep watch over you through every hour of the night until sleep takes you fully and morning rises without fear. When morning eventually comes, it will bring responsibilities again. But perhaps it does not need to bring the same inner violence. Perhaps something from tonight can remain. A slower sentence, a kinder image of God, a less suspicious relation to rest, a memory of Adam and Eve before fear learned to shape the body. If even one of those things remains, then the night has not been empty. It has been seed-like. And so the blessing extends beyond sleep into waking. May you rise, when you rise, with at least one thread of this older quiet still in you. May it meet your first thoughts before the noise does. May it remind you that the deepest reality has not changed merely because the world is loud. God was near at the beginning, and his nearness has not been undone. Let that be the final pillow beneath your soul. So keep only the simplest part if all else fades. Nearness came first. Not panic, not shame, not proving. Nearness. And the God who was near at the beginning is not absent from the bed where you lie tonight. Carry that nearness like a final whisper into sleep, and let it outlast the noise. Let that truth remain simple enough to remember even half asleep. You are not abandoned in the dark. The nearness of God reaches there too. That is enough truth for one peaceful night. Sleep under that assurance. Good night.